Thank you. That feels good. Perhaps this morning, because we didn't yesterday, even though we were missing a few people. Well, Dan wants to do introductions a little bit later in the day, so we'll do that. But it would be nice, I really think, to come together in a circle. And I think we can circle the chairs here, circle the wagons, so to speak. Just kind of come around this part here. And that'd be a nice way to connect this morning. So our gratitude for each and every one of you for being here this weekend, certainly for Dan and Valerie for coming all this way. Many of you have traveled far and wide to be here and done what you needed to make this weekend something special. Thank you. Gratitude to all that you bring with you, your personal guides, your personal angels, and all the wisdom and knowledge that you bring. And that's felt in the circle now, and it's shared, because that's what this is about. Making what we are and who we are shareable. So, this we do, and this we bring. This is our intent into the circle this morning. So let it be. So, very gently and slowly, as you open your hands now, without breaking the energy of the connection, holding the connection to everyone else while you bring your hands to your heart. And so it is.
Oh.
Oh.
Oh. Thank you, brother. Thank you. In the heart space with us. That's good.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we will call that our caduceus breath for the morning. We've done it. We're fused. It's good. So the first order of business, usually in these seminars, and I think should be here, is questions, thoughts, feedbacks, comments, dreams, anything from yesterday, anything that you want to talk about this morning. We'll take a few moments. Late morning or sometime this afternoon, we're going to do another circle and actually introduce each other. But right now, the issue is anything you want to talk about, questions, comments, feedbacks, dreams from yesterday, or anything. Yes? How can we serve you? Any thoughts? Yes, please.
The 5 magic schools, with the Enochine being one through John D. and the abuse that he suffered at the hands of Kelly in his later years, and following a similar path to Kesla, where they give us lots, but their waning years are in obscurity. I felt a bit of condescension yesterday, Dan, as far as this is not a group that can go to elevated levels, right? That might be for an advanced class. And with that, just leads me to investigate on my own.
Well, I really...
what would be in the upper levels?
I'm deeply interested, for example, in the end of John Dee's life and the advanced aspects of that. And please, I really didn't intend any conversation.
I know you didn't. I know you didn't there.
But there just physically wasn't time to go into the advanced Enochian thing very much. We could perhaps still in this weekend do a bit of that. In fact, today there's a certain point in the Winged Dragon story. So we're open to thoughts and questions on the advanced Enochian Fane of John D story. And it is true we do more of that perhaps in the advanced course.
Are there other magic systems that we're part of that we don't know? Rosicrucianism, or...
We're going to link some of that to the Bacon story perhaps later today and see a connection between them through Bacon to John Dee and what that meant. So, we have time for a few of those threads here, and your questions help us get there, so that's fine.
The other one I would like to have, maybe on your website you can point me there, is the 22 paths of the Tree of Life.
The note was, the original concept was that if you took the three-dimensional origin of the Tree of Life, we have an animation here, which is basically a shadow of a tetra, and then a hex view of a cube, and then the hex view of a dodeca, locking into place, and that shadow is the Tree of Life. And if you summate all of the different rungs on the ladder, it was about 22, which were not just the OTO, the letters of Hebrew, but the specific amount of tilt it took to make that letter in Hebrew was the angle to climb that ladder of symmetry toward the Ein Sof implosion at the top. And then there's the issue about the 22 versus the 27.
Is this a two-dimensional versus three-dimensional?
Exactly. That if you did not have three-dimensional modeling tools, then your way of describing to people how to climb the ladder of symmetry, shadow of tetra, shadow of cube, shadow of dodeca, embedding, and you put that on flatland, the shadow is the Tree of Life. So obviously the instruction was about the symmetry of toward implosion. We should, I suppose, dig out the animation here, but yes. So it's wonderful that you've been studying these things and bringing this up. That's great.
I put a couple of crystals underneath your Star Mother kit on the table there.
Oh, I see,
And
yes.
one is named Chiron and the other is named Sedna. So your last name is Winter.
It's the winter of our discontents.
No. It's the calm from which we come from.
No, that's nice. Well, thank you. So we will respect their aura. Thank you. That's great. Great. The website with the three-dimensional animation on Tree of Life is soulinvitation.com/Tree of Life, you could guess. And the website with the Ophanim Enochian, soulinvitation.com/Orion, if people want those mentioned. And here would be the, see if we, oops, I guess we're going to need power on this baby. So the idea was in ancient times, the profound spiritual evolution that comes from increasing the number of axes of symmetry of charge in your aura, tetrahedral fire breath, tetra is on the bottom. Tetra is in the cube next. And then the dodecahedron is on top. And that's exactly how you shadow the three platonics to make the Tree of Life. So if you wanted to teach people how to climb a ladder of symmetry by increased axis of charge rotation in their aura, you would use that model, unless you happen to have the tools to teach it in 3 dimensions,
And do the
which we now do.
rungs or roots represent the amino acids? If we dovetail that into the elementary or the periodic table of the elements?
See if this will... Oh, the animation's not playing. That's not good. But you can see it here, actually.
It might want to keep some.
There's an animation just underneath.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You found it for me. You're good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So here, and in the original animation, we had a Hebrew letter on the rungs, and you can see that, indeed, that would be an angular distance. So to climb from a tetrahedron into a cube, and then from a cube into a dodecahedron, the ability to make that transition requires knowing the tilt angle in 3D. And each letter of Hebrew is nothing more or less than a tilt angle in 3D. And so if you summate the number of rungs on this ladder to 22, and then that's the concept that this is a map to climbing a ladder of symmetry toward the Ein Sof charge radiant implosive embedding.
And we spent a lot of time on this yesterday, going from cube to dodec.
Exactly. Thank you. Perfect.
Yes.
That's the point. As far as representing the codons of DNA, I'm not sure.
No, that's the 64, but the 22 amino acids.
Ah, that's a neat thought.
Yes.
I haven't gone through that. That's fascinating.
Building blocks.
But
Fascinating.
those 22 paths represent almost anything you can think of. I mean, that's the whole idea of the Tree of Life. You can map it into evolution, you can map it into math. You can
They
map
might
it into-
represent any metaphor you can dream of, but I don't think they represent everything you think of.
Oh,
Well, but applying it specifically to
I want to
code.
draw that
Yeah.
clarity there to feeling versus thinking, and you emote ions. And I wrote a few words on the board there, where seems like we're dealing with emotion and motion and ion. And there's others, prefixes you can add to that. But
Motion.
the etymology of what you were doing yesterday is fascinating, right? And that's how we trace our genealogical roots. And that's, like, I feel that you've spent a tremendous amount of time in Sumerian, and what we have to transition to is Gaelic.
And just in Scotland recently, we were discussing that connection. the Sanskrit Sumerian roots of Gaelic, and it's well acknowledged. It's a fascinating story. And I like this as well because today's story is about perfect branching, which is called Jan, J-O-N, from which we have the word, the lineage of Jan, which means to branch perfectly, ion. So the ion here is actually a description of Jan, which means perfect branching, actually. To enter the possibility of perfect branching, Jan, John, is actually what the shun of emotion and locomotion. So that's very nice. Thank you. Very nice.
So when you're talking there about Gaelic, do you bring in any of the more Germanic languages, say, such as Old English?
I don't know. We were looking at the book by Boudet, who was the brains behind Saunière in southern France, the Holy Grail, and in Boudet's work on the origin of Celtic and was the origin of the languages of the UK, and he was describing, for example, Anglo-Saxon, and he said, and remember, this is the guy that discovered the geometry of Rennes-le-Château that became Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the star maps of the Gaelic, which is today's subject. It's cool, and there's the origin of the Celtic language.
Doesn't Saxon come from Isaac's son?
He said that Saxon is someone whose extended family had the muscle to sack other villages. And the Sax sons were someone who were powerful enough to sack villages. That's what he said. But the point was that he was actually looking at the origins of the language to find the origins of the bloodline, which was quite nice, actually. But I don't think I have a detailed answer to your question about the Old English, which is a fascinating question. Good. Well, so we want to get into the heavy stuff here. Great. Any more thoughts? Yes, please.
I just want to do a recap, because I was thinking about
Please.
the tornado again.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What actually creates the tornado is when you get that movement that is building and building through the torus. Is that right?
Yes, that all systems, all wave systems, which all waves are ultimately charge compressing, that no wave system actually organizes itself into stability unless it first becomes a tornado on a donut. There is no other form in physics or hydrodynamics. So obviously to start creation, for example, Arthur Young, The Reflexive Universe, he says our visible universe is a saddle shape on the surface of a torus. And that's the beginning of today's story, actually. So.
And, but the tornado, we perceive the tornado as being destructive. Is it like an out of control movement or
The only sense in which a tornado is destructive is if its center is out of phase or lacking implosion. What we're illustrating here is a tornado is just like everything else in the universe, incubus succubus in the astral literature. You can see pictures of magnetic donuts coming off leaking power transformers that look like a worm trying to become alive. It's called rod theory in psychotronics. And these incubus succubus are charge fields that are learning how to suck. And if they succeed, they become life. If they don't, they die. Tornado is the same way.
is the stable structure is the torus?
What causes stability is because of having its flow distributed on a torus, it enables this axis of rotation to be phase locked to this axis of rotation to be phase locked to this. So I've got X, Y, and Z axis of rotation. I have X, Y, and Z axis of rotation. I've got 3 gyroscopes storing inertia all on one surface. That means inertially that this device cannot be pushed around. So this is, in hydrodynamics, the fundamentally self-organizing shape. Basically, it's creating a standing wave that can stand.
Yeah. In terms of steering the tornado flow, is that the key?
Actually, the point is that this tornado by itself if it's not phase locked to other structures, is not self-steering. It doesn't make gravity. But if you have one of these inside another, and the ratio happens to be golden with a pent at the core, then you start to get the implosion effect. And that's what mind does. And the implosion effect begins to accelerate charge through the speed of light, called gravity. And that's the beginning of appearing to self-steer and become self-aware. Our word self-awareness and life then refer to the electrical connection that results when these tornadoes nest recursively and thus create communication through the speed of light with all of biology and DNA.
Is that like another dimension then, when you have those?
What we're calling another dimension, remember, is always only an additional superposed axis of spin symmetry.
Yeah, but
So-
the recursive
Yes, so that...
nesting, is that another dimension?
Well, that would be one language for it. More precisely in science, when more than one donut nest inside the other, that electric field will show up in a spectrum analyzer where this wavelength and that wavelength show up as a harmonic. And so in your heart, when you feel love, the number of these increases radically. And that's called harmonic inclusiveness, and that's medically proven to resist disease.
Well, what I'm thinking is that it has no end. It goes, like the nanopod, it goes smaller, it goes bigger. So that is like another dimension.
Well, the term other dimension here merely refers to a superposed rotation. But the sense of infinite would be that the harmonic series would begin to produce acceleration at the core, and probably limited by something related to the Planck length and the fine structure constant. At that point of wavelength ratio of the inside to the outside of the donut, the inertia is translated through the speed of light. And that's actually what we involved in the equations to do the origin of the alphabet, because we had to know the ratio of the inside to the outside of this donut.
And so are you talking like at the level of quantum foam?
Precisely.
Okay.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yes, thank you. Yes.
And I just want to go back to something earlier you said. You said the only stable form of a wave is a self-absorbing toroid. What about something simple as a standing sine wave?
Basically, a torus is a form of a standing sine wave in a cross-section.
Oh, okay, if you want to map it to that dimension, okay.
So the symbol of the Tao is basically a cross-section of this. Yes.
For that matter, down that line, Henri Poincaré actually proved that this is the only stable perturbation in that space.
Well, that's nice,
It
yes.
was mathematically proved.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then later we look at Poincaré discovering the dodecahedron to model gravity. Precisely. Nice, yes. We have the advanced kids here. I like it. Let's do it. Please. Did you have a thought?
No.
Oh, no. Don't let the physics embarrass you. If you have a question, don't worry about it. We can talk about anything. Please.
Could you just review real quick on the heart? You said there was 5 slip knots inside of that energy field, whereas the heart had 7 different, basically muscle layers to create the toroidal field.
The symmetry of the human heart is very central to our course, and it's very appropriate to focus on that for a moment. Thank you. The essential model is, remember, that slip knot Anu, had 7 spins on the outside and 5 on the inside. Let's see here. We've got so many images of that. So we do here. So this was the original Anu depiction. And this is basically a group of 7 spirals here that goes around, actually 3 times. But inside there's 5, and it's not depicted very well here. But if we go back and we look at this picture, again, 7 outside and 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inside. Now, that is literally the heart muscle in this sense, that the layers of the muscle on the outside of the heart are precisely angled. See if I can do this right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the angle of those layers of muscles in the dissections of Pettigrew, as published in the Anthroposophic Vortex of Life, Lawrence Edwards' famous classic, emphasized at great length why those were the 7 angles of the tetrahedrons. Arrow, the 7 arrows of the heart, in the famous book 7 Arrows by Hieronymus Storm in the Native American tradition. Whereas on the inside, and this was my hypothesis when I published my first book, Alphabet of the Heart, that structure was effectively the golden mean spiral. So what you had in the center of the heart, there's another picture of that somewhere here, we'll find it. What you had in the center of the heart was the flame letter, the 5-ness. So if the central spiral in the heart is not moving, and the outer 7 layers of muscle, which layer of muscle goes in what order determines at what angle the tornado, the vortex, is thrown out of the heart. And that ability to throw out of the heart a tornado at any tilt angle in 3D based on the 7 spins of the tetra means that what's landing on the thymus where the immune system is created is a shadow of a Hebrew letter whose harmonic content determines whether or not you get an immune system. And so that's why the book is entitled Alphabet of the Heart. The central structure of the flame letter, the spiral, is in the heart and doesn't move so much. And the 7 layers then are determining which sequence of compression waves. So the EKG is actually determining which layer of the heart muscle is firing in what sequence. And that's Marinelli's famous paper, The Heart is Not a Pump. It is rather throwing blood into a series of nested vortices. And the angle of tilt of those letters, called the alphabet of the heart, determines what harmonics of sound your thymus sees, the shadow on the wall of that cave. And those harmonics are how the white blood cells are fabricated.
Would the projected light come from behind or in front?
What it is the projected phonon wave is coming directly from the center of the heart. And the pressure of that phonon wave arrives as a shadow on the wall of the cave, whose harmonics then are woven into white blood cells.
Does it take more than one light source to make a hologram?
In this case, internal coherence could be the solution to that problem, perhaps, which is what we pretend to measure
You
tomorrow.
would match your external characteristics to
That the nature
the
of
same.
the gravity-making nature of the heart is that internal phase coherence is what delivers the hologram. Another way of putting that, here's...
I just may ask, you were talking about phonons rather than photons, so this is more of a sonar type.
That we're referring to the
image, right?
voltage delivered by the piezoelectric nature of blood in the presence of a sound wave called phonon, precisely. Another example of this, and we have pictures here, maybe I should find it for you.
I understand the 7, but I'm not quite sure on the 5 in the middle. The 7 makes a lot of sense.
The 5-ness has to do with the fact that there are 5 spins in the dodeca, and that dodeca is the central structure based on phi, and it is implosive. It is allows charge to radiate because the implosion creates perfect explosion. Whereas the outside structure is 7 spins, tetracube, which is holding within, incubating. So you've got containment on the outside and projection on the inside. And that's the structure of the... Now, I have actual 3-dimensional animation of the Anu from a Java that Frank did, but I'll have to dig that up later. But just to show you... and so that's 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. Drawings of the Anu, in my view, is simply the Theosoph's clairvoyant way of representing what is in fact simply the 7 spins of the tetra on the outside and the 5 spins of the cube and dodeca on the inside. And that really is what the Anu is about. That the perfect slipknot is merely phi projection, cube and dodeca on the inside, and the 7 spins of the tetra on the outside. And the drawing of the Anu is actually not accurate. That the accurate physics is actually simply the physics of 5 spins and 7 spins. And that's the real nature of the Anu that they then derive 3 per unit quark. And so Frank did a lot of work, actually, on one occasion, making a Java animation of this. I wanted to show you, just maybe to give us a little handle on this, that in terms of understanding the heart profoundly, there is a famous section of the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy, in which they're describing why so many crop circles were based on the shape of the hat of Osiris. Now, the hat of Osiris is famously, we now know, a drawing of the shape of the pericardium, which is the soundboard container that contains the hearts and the heart's sound. And actually,
Pericardium's up in the head.
well, in the case of Osiris, the pericardium is the cone above your head, which is directing your aura. But in biology, clearly, the pericardium is the sac of muscle containing your heart. And in today's story, we'll see why, but in the book 2/3, they say the Arcturians are the origin of the Essenes. In today's story, we're going to see that that's Akhenaten, Atun being Enki, who changed his name to Moses, the founder of the Essenes, and monotheism. So the Arcturian Essene Atun is saying to us in the book 2/3 explicitly, look, get the skill to consciously control the muscular shape of your pericardium, and then you will have the skill to steer the gravity force making of your heart as a rocket nozzle. The same physics, and it's explicitly explained in the book in great detail that you will not be a star navigator, you will not be Osiris going through stars, you will not have the direction of the cone tornado steering your aura, unless you get the skill to consciously control with your muscles the shape of your pericardium. In exactly the same way that having conscious control to control the muscles of your eyeball control if you can focus light. The fact is that you don't have the skill to focus the gravity-making power of your heart, turning it into a rocket motor to steer your aura, just like a nozzle on a jet engine. Tilting the nozzle determines whether you steer. So this is the device, the pericardium, that determines whether you have control over the gravity force made by your heart. And they're explaining biologically developing those inner muscles is the process of becoming a star navigator. And those are the people that got big salaries in those gold mining days. Yes. Yes.
You were right, I need to write that question, the answer down. I asked Dan earlier about re-explaining grace, and I need to write it now.
We suggested yesterday that the grace referred to by religion refers to the skill to move with the calculus of curvature necessary to conserve charge. In holistic architecture, they call that living curvation. So, for example, if I know the angle at which to move the capacitive field that follows life, charge, chi, grace, follows specifically because the curvature has conserved and has not had any jerks. Okay. And so when you study calculus, you're actually learning grace. Yeah, in that sense. If you really understood calculus. Yes?
I would like to just acknowledge, I've noticed that we're about half and half of scientific minds and more the feeling minds or feeling of hearts that we've come together in this class. I would also like to thank, not being the scientific type, never having wanted to go there, I would like to thank the scientific minds for doing what you've done, because in your presentation yesterday, I felt a lot of it was going over my head. However, the feeling part of me wanted to cry, because I have always known this, and being a child and a teenager, having experienced those things that you're explaining, giving me the language, and then shoving it aside because you have to live in this world here.
The taste of bliss.
And at this point in my life, getting it back.
Well, thank you for thanking of us. And some of us who have had trouble feeling, thank you for bringing that feeling and softness. Like, do you mind sharing your story last night of loosening the muscles? It was a nice story.
Oh, I was just saying last night that as a boy I was trained not to cry. And it really just kind of ossified these muscles.
Like the stiff upper lip story.
So I had to go through a deep series of rolfing, and this was the most painful part. And when they finally loosened this, I could cry again.
Yeah, it's really a nice story.
Just really just embedded in my whole musculature.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And in today's cosmic story, we're going to figure out, why did the dragon queen Elizabeth tell her son not to cry, which caused his upper lip to stiffen? That's today's story. Good. Well, thank you. Any other thoughts that we'd like to chat just a bit before we? Yeah.
Good question. Could you do a recap again on how the mind stores information holographically?
The question was about how the mind stores information holographically. In the book Holographic Brain by Carl Pribram, he's suggesting that the optical cortex functions as a kind of hologram where each synapse firing is kind of a net of fireflies, Indra's net. And the resolution of that hologram is proportional to the density of firing. And that's where we got to the instruction, do not buy a used car from Shifty Eyes, because indeed it's been measured at MIT, a professor. He showed that if you're able to focus, it produces measurably increased synaptic firing density in the optical cortex. Where if someone has what's called a saccade, which is Shifty Eyes, that the firing density is much lower, and therefore the optical resolution of the hologram is much lower. So if you want HD TV in your mind, you need to learn how to focus, really, which is increasing the charge density and therefore the information density of the hologram. Now, the story of the lady in the mirror with a mirror and a magnifying glass in her purse making a hologram was to show that the hologram inside your head generates phase discipline, ability to exchange charge, with the hologram outside your head, matter, which is a hologram with a weight problem, and the ability to exchange information charge between the hologram inside and the hologram outside, determining if your dreams come true, is dependent upon generating the phase discipline to think in the language of light and become fractal and charge compressing inside. And the index to that phase discipline is called alphabet, if that were indeed the real alphabet of the symmetry of light. Yeah?
Dan, are you saying that if you verbalize what you want to be manifested in your life, it happens?
Well, the audio aspect is potent as well. Here we're talking about the optical hologram initially, but remember in the Steiner school, the exercise, much better this exercise would be of children who have not been addicted to TV, but if their inner muscles are still available to create an image inside, which TV can destroy in young children, unfortunately, but the ability to have the inner muscle to make an accurate picture of a rose inside your head, the Steiner children are taught to do that in a group until you can very clearly smell roses in the room. And they start by making a series of drawings and get more and more clear. And then they're taught to make the rose open and the perfume fills the room. And then they all visualize together the rose closing and you can feel the room wilting. So they're making an electric field potently by the phase discipline of that hologram. Whether it's word or thought, it's a sonic hologram or an optical, the principles would be the same. So the issue was how they do that was they're gradually taught to make an increasingly clear series of hand drawings of the stages of a rose opening until those phase discipline symmetry paths are clear enough in their optical mentation that the inner muscles can build that hologram with such resolution the symbol becomes the object. So the hologram inside your head is normally of lower charge density. But if you do the homework, the hologram inside your head becomes higher resolution and has phase discipline, and then your dreams come true because you phase lock mass.
Is that affected also by the sixth eye instead of just the optical influence to create the hologram?
The notion from Bentoff's work on the biophysics, perhaps, of Kundalini was that the phonon wave geometry that's massaged by the EKG and phase-locked in the ventricle horns is focused on the pineal pituitary complex. And the pineal gland migrates from crystal toward liquid, soften the hearts of the hardened sinners. It's softened by the phonon. At the same time, the liquids of the brain are now being columnated more toward crystal. And at a certain point, the phase propagation velocities equalize from liquid to crystal and crystal to liquid. And the cavity goes critical, a kind of sonic description of bliss focused on the pineal. And then the ductless glands secrete a hormone which, like not just melatonin and serotonin, but the pinolene, for example, which radically affects the conductivity threshold of the synapse. So the brain liquids can literally become a superconductor. So saying that the pineal is a residual of the tissue of the retina is just the beginning. The pineal is, in that sense, the steering wheel for the part of the glandular aura that's going through the speed of light. The downside of that is that Dracos who couldn't make their own bliss juice would eat live human pineal glands, creating a black market across the stars. And they would have a near-death experience and become the age of the persons whose gland they ate. It's the famous sad story of the fallen Dracs. That's the
Therefore,
power.
the dark crystal was right. They were eating gilflings.
They were eaten.
Gilflings. 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 Why are you eating gilflings?
Yeah. And this was called the Black Ritual. It's talked about even in terms of Thoth in the book God King Akhenaten, about the Syrian origins of Akhenaten and Thoth, whom we will discuss today. So lots to the pineal story. Pining away. To learn how to pine, to yearn, is reflected in the Sufi, charge the battery of yearning. Because pining is phase conjugate.
Will you talk a little about external input in that subliminally there's a specific resolution that they hide messages and deliver them in. Can you do stuff like that with your blinking if you wanted to see auras?
The blink rate is quite profound. In fact, in the technology used for electronic induction of hypnosis, that's what's modulated. It's a pulse width modulated optical device that induces hypnosis based on alpha and theta harmonics, etc. So the blink rate is profound. Remember in the movie Andromeda Strain where the the red light blinked at the wrong rate and triggered the epileptic seizure. And we know that epilepsy is just a false turn on the way to bliss, actually. In a body that desperately needs bliss and can't get there, you have the phenomenon of epilepsy.
And is there something to what you did yesterday where you made the phi spiral? But it depends on which hand and which eye.
That there is a difference.
Which Francois is so much into.
Yeah, just that the right-left hemisphere and the right-left hand differ significantly in terms of the electrical nature of centripetal versus centrifugal. So normally when you're looking in your hand, you're looking in your left hand.
Yes.
Well, when you're projecting, you're using your right hand.
And that gives you an indication of your individual polarity?
Well,
because it goes both ways.
But right-left archetypally would be.
Yes.
And even when you're restoring people who have lost polarity using magnets under the feet, if the magnet's polarity is correct, you can restore polarity quickly. It's good for acute condition and not for chronic. Remember in the alphabet of the heart, the symmetry of the muscles at the center of the hand also can be used to make the alphabet.
Would you talk on the z-axis of the torus around the Earth grid? We've got the North and the South Pole. Is it fluctuating in constant gyroscopic motion? Is that the PowerPoint that the pyramids were laid onto, but is it flux now?
What is being introduced here is the fact that many artists, including Universal One and others, have suggested that the Earth's spin symmetry axis, like any true magnetic domain, is actually octahedral. And so there's always a belly of the North Pole symmetry. And as you see, as a torus would gain resolution, the subcomponents of that torus would then introduce the tetracube octa symmetry. So the equator phenomena would have a very significant electrical.
But we're wobbling all the time.
Nutation precession. Well, we'll talk about that maybe later, but just here, seeing that the spiritual literature is quite clear that people closer to the equator actually have a greater chance of conscious evolution electrically. And that's been supposedly documented, that people far from the equator have a harder time triggering bliss, actually, because it has to do with access to the sun.
That's 33rd degree.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stories about that, yeah.
Well, don't hide that stuff. I mean,
Access to the sun is introduction to the sun god conversation today. Atun left when the sun disappeared. Atun goes away. That's the story from Egypt, and it's good physics.
So that means, like, just to follow that train of thought, and I really do want to get back to our history of the galaxy, because that's why we're here today. But, for example, people who live in the northern hemisphere tend to be more intellectual, and they've created more science and stuff like that. And you would find people in Latin America being more in the heart.
or more passion.
More passion.
Yes, yes. And the people also near the equator are more subject to addiction, however. Like in southern Europe, tobacco use is increasing radically. And because in the southern...
That could be marketing too.
Well, but I think in southern latitudes where you have more access to the sun, if you don't know how to do a bliss experience, it increases the addiction tendency. Yeah. Yes?
What about with, one of the things over the summer that I've been practicing is working with lightning and waterfalls. Hooking into that and riding those.
Lightning and waterfalls.
Lightning, waterfalls, and then adding in the sun. Staring at the sun and bringing those in for the charge and just riding that.
And that's how a scientist would describe how to make ozone, actually. and indeed, it's perfect. It's how to bond oxygen into fire. It's a good metaphor. And also the physics of the origin of primal soup. You get the spark, combine the spark with the protein liquids, and the charge compression can induce the next axis of helically superposed spin rotation. And so in the primal soup, the proteins became DNA because of lightning.
Okay, because I was wondering what I was doing, because I spent the last couple of weeks just now by waterfalls and out in the sun, and I'm telling you, I could do that all my whole life.
Yeah, it's ozone density there, which is exquisitely fractal for the air. And so charge distribution efficiency goes way up. It's a beautiful thing.
So the same thing happened after a major rainstorm.
Precisely, very healthy. Particularly rain with lightning would be excellent. Yes, for your aura.
Yesterday you were talking about measuring the coherence with what, heart map with Glenn Ryan or something like that. But how does that tie in with the question on the holotropic mind? In other words, the intensity of the imagery of the synapses creating a holographic mind. How does that correlate with the coherence of the heart or the measurement?
That's exactly the issue. We're saying that when the heart becomes internally phase coherent, and that is the subject for tomorrow, that allows the heart to become turned from a flashlight into a laser. And that same form of coherence is what turns the brain hologram into a laser. And what we're saying is the climax form of coherence is fractal in both the case of the heart and the brain. So that question will hopefully take on more meaning tomorrow when we show you the mathematics we use to calculate coherence, which is a second order power spectra, the cepstrum. So indeed, turning biology into a laser is precisely what the word ka, the coherence of your boat to the underworld, the coherence of your biology's charge field, whether you survive death, is that coherence. And the EKG and the EEG are just one of many ways in which biology gets there. Yes?
Is that analogy of turning a flashlight into a laser, the increased density in the synaptic firing in the brain, which is focus, versus...
Precisely, that it's not just the density of the firing, but it's the phase discipline of the firing, so that you get the square wave at the synapse with a billion other square waves at synapse, and when they lock into phase properly, the entire hologram becomes coherent, and that's where the alpha and the theta getting to golden mean ratio, perfect caduceus, massive compression wave involving billions of neurons creates a fractal charge attractor called enlightenment, and literally the end of all forms of addiction, attention deficit, and the beginning of bliss.
So what you're saying there sounds very similar to a Class D amplifier.
A Class D amplifier.
Yes.
Say what that is?
A Class D amplifier is where they basically take, an audio input, which is, fairly random type as, combination of sine waves, and they actually create a series of square waves and recombine them at the ends to create the, amplified audio signal.
So that you have noise reduction in the process?
Well, theoretically it works out mathematically. In reality, the THD isn't always the best, but it is extremely efficient, obviously, because you're dealing with square waves rather than, partially turned on transistors. But it, like I said, it's a bunch of square waves combining together to create sine waves, or any combination thereof, say audio.
The thing is, a square wave is theoretically harmonically infinite if the square is really sharp. But if there were a square wave of the right geometry, the harmonics could be log functions of golden ratio, and then it would be implosive. And that's what the Hutchinson spark gap making gravity does, actually, the Hutchinson effect. So the concept of square wave is, but maybe that's a little bit beyond some of us here, so we will maybe leave
Yeah,
that.
the perfect square wave is impossible to create.
Yeah, that's the point. But maybe you
And
could,
there's always the Gibbs phenomenon anyways.
maybe you could get the perfect square wave if you had log functions of 5. Maybe it'd be the perfect pent wave.
No, to create a perfect square wave actually would involve time travel.
That's right. You'd have charge acceleration through the speed of light, precisely. Which, if you look at the Hutchinson device, they're making gravity with spark gaps. Anyway, but this is more leaving some people behind here, so let's do that later.
But
Yeah.
Hutchinson is
Thank you.
Hutchinson, the guy who levitates things.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a spark gap, and then he makes gravity. He doesn't have a clue of the principle. Yes.
Oh, I don't want to go off on that.
No, let's okay. If we go there, we might get lost. Or are we already lost? Okay. So, the story. The story.
Yay! This is going to be the next Star Wars series, by the way.
Yeah, this is the next Star Wars series. Okay.
Certainly couldn't be any worse than the last one.
One of the titles of today's story is The Stellar Ignition of DNA. And to understand that part of the story, it's important that we have in mind the climax from yesterday. Because that's the theme of the whole story, is the stellar ignition of DNA. So just a very 2-minute review of the climax of yesterday. We were looking at DNA saying, look, in the braiding process in DNA, when you have bliss, the phase cascade of your EKG, EEG allows the recursive braiding of the DNA to create an envelope within an envelope where the wavelength of this braid is embedded in the wavelength of this braid with recursive phase discipline. That results in a condition in the DNA which is ultimately probably toroidal, based on the 7th recursive braid, makes a donut, causing implosion. And we suggested that that was the physics of the Lord of the Ring. Yes? That why the alphabet on the side of the ring donut, Hungarian Finnish, was from Alpha Draconis, which is a software environment for teaching genes, DNA, to absorb charge, because at the symmetry point of the helix, where the DNA is actually eating the charge field that causes it to grow, the codons are arranged tetrahedrally, and that's the origin of the tetra alphabets like Hebrew, and that controlled DNA's ability to swallow charge. And then we discussed the fact that when that was recursive, that torus donut would implode, here's the toroidal DNA, squirting charge through the speed of light, which is how DNA makes gravity. We discussed Gergiev work in Russia, measuring phantom DNA and black hole making in DNA, so that DNA is measurably a gravity-making device. So this is the background, that if you can generate the conditions to ignite DNA, you can become a star navigator. You can become worth a high salary in the dragon culture. Yes? You get the good bucks. So the skill to do that is say again?
You get more gill plants. You get to eat more pineal glands of mere humans.
You get to use more of the resources of the galaxy and harvest DNA over many more planets. So the trick, the skill, the ability to create environments where DNA could be ignited became a galaxy-wide political drama. For example, the dragons, Asauru, who came here to Earth, were deeply concerned with generating the electrical conditions to ignite DNA. We talk about the Garden of Eden as a capacitor to prevent cellular aging. Yes? The Shem in the Bible, mistranslated, altar, actually was Highward Firestone. It's a capacitor to make a charge field to ignite DNA. The dragons inhabit the right caves because the correct caves have the capacitive field to ignite DNA. So, our theme now is how does the real principle of how DNA is ignited toward the power of gravity making and star inhabiting, which is the destiny of DNA. Our theme is how that ability to ignite DNA is reflected in the major events in the history the recent history of DNA in our galactic sector. Yeah? So now we're about to embark on the story. The recent history of DNA in our galactic sector. Are you ready? Okay. Now, in the very distant past, many sources suggest there's something called the galactic core cultures. And the galactic core cultures, and I'm referring specifically to my teacher on Ophanim Enochian, vincentbridges.com, he talks about the galactic core cultures as being a group of cultures nearer to the galactic center who administrate the propagation of DNA across stars. And that they basically had an agenda which had to do with the discovery of the role of DNA in stabilizing star birth. Okay, so the agenda here had to do with this discovery of the incredibly potent role of DNA in stabilizing star evolution. To understand that from the point of view of physics, we need to tell the little story of star evolution. This is ancient, hoary past history. You know, there are those like Arthur Young, Reflexive Universe, and Dwayne Elgin's book, Theory of Continuous Creation, who suggest that the evolution of the universe is not spherical, it is in fact toroidal, reflexive, recursive, and instead of there being a Big Bang, it's an ongoing, contiguous Big Bang because compression is emerging from the center of a donut. That's also true of Bentov's dream in his Kundalini-induced Stalking the Wild Pendulum. The final book was called The Cosmic Comic Book, where the replicating star systems looked like a giant living cell, and above the helix of meiosis, mitosis, the cytosome, the centriole, that's what I'm thinking of. The centriole, if you zoom in on a black hole above and below the DNA in a meiosis, mitosis, you know how the microtubules arrange themselves in this beautiful picture of cell division? And above and below the electric field, yes, thank you. These are the centrioles, and no, these are the centrioles here. This is perfect. And these are the microtubules, which Bruce Lipton and Stuart Roy Hameroff say are the physics of consciousness. Little did they know that the microtubule was a golden ratio concentric tube. And if you look at a living cell replicating, there's a black hole here and here called centriole in biophysics. And when Bentov zoomed in, now this is a picture of galaxies replicating seen from a distance. And if you zoomed in here and here, you saw a centriole, which is a black hole, which was the shape of Ankh and Aleph and Omega. And the wave trains of those letters were the eddies called replicating stars. So you have cookie cutters who's generating waves that are causing the replication of galaxies. And so the name and the shape and the service are one of those letters. Yeah. So you have a big picture saying that basically the evolution of stars is sentient. Now, if you ask an astrophysicist and you have him discuss with you the evolution of stars, he basically describes how the atomic table is built, in the sense that as you grow the atomic table, effectively what you're doing is growing fractality. So just to review the one picture from yesterday, for example, one or two. When you look at hydrogen, you're seeing that the hydrogen is the implosive seed for a heterodyning wave that produces the whole atomic table. And so when you're growing the atomic table, you're growing a nest of tetracube octaecosa. This is Chemist Moon, University of Chicago, in the platonic symmetry of the nucleus, which is obviously his dream for planets. Perfect the nesting, unpack the fractal, and you got the flower called the atomic table. So they say, well, first you get an old star, it makes hydrogen. And then, first you get a young star, it makes hydrogen. And then the star gets a little older, it learns how to make helium. Then the star gets a little older yet, etc., etc. And gradually, over billions of years, stars learn to finish making the atomic table by eating each other. So they're building a fractal. Cool. So the evolution of the atomic table in the evolution of the stars is a construction of a fractal. Yes?
And what about, the larger type atoms and molecules that can only be created in a laboratory? Well, how would that fit into there?
Well, in the evolution of stars, they're describing the evolution of the heavy elements here. But then in terms of molecular biology, that's the next step we're about to get to. That's right where we're going now. So the idea is then that to make biology is a similar process. You got these proteins, and they learn how to eat charge. And if a protein can eat charge, which is lightning in the primal soup, here comes the lightning, the protein says. And the ones that learn how to be screwed into a helix, that's exactly what they are. And phase conjugation is getting screwed, and that's the birth of DNA out of proteins. So the fact that the lightning had to be of the right DC polarity to make all biological proteins enantiomorphic one way is in the right-hand screw rule. The correct polarity of the lightning is centripetal more than centrifugal. And so you have, that's why all living proteins have a stairway up the down staircase. The helix goes one way. So the proteins are actually catching the lightning in such a way as to enter the next axis of spin symmetry called the next dimension. In this case, how proteins become a helix, namely DNA, and beginning to become implosive and more fractal. So this is a very rough sketch of an outline of the fact that not only was the evolution of the atomic table in the evolution of stars the growth of a fractal, but the evolution of biology, and particularly DNA, was the extension of that fractality to superpose more and more axes of spin symmetry on it. So now I got this thread, and I braid the braid of the braid of the braid recursively 7 times. This thread had 5 axes of spin, cube 3, dodeca 4, dodeca down a helix 5. And then I recursively braid that thread 7 times until it becomes a donut, toroidal DNA, the seventh veil, the 7th seal, the 7th sign.
Demonstrate recursion.
Recursion is in the picture.
Slinky, please.
It's a little hard to do, but
I know.
It would be this.
You're twisting a loop.
Yeah, and then I braid the braid of the braid on the braid recursively. And if the phase discipline between those braids is embeddable, the DNA can begin to implode and make a torus and do all the fun stuff called getting a soul and making gravity. We're trying to begin to understand why stars go through so much work to make DNA. Obviously, stars evolve a kind of intelligence that makes stellar evolution sustainable, self-organizing, fractal, opposite to chaos. And stars apparently do a lot of work to evolve life systems like ours. And we have to ask in terms of simple energy efficiency, what is the reason that stars go to so much work to make DNA? And I'm suggesting to you that the secret and mystery there is that DNA makes the gravity that holds stars together. This is a new hypothesis I suggest we entertain seriously. And this forms a kind of substance background to our story. For example, one aspect of that story is, if you read Reiki Reikop's story of the Golden Ones, he's saying that our seraphim, dragon ancestors, went 300 years into our future and found that for light years around the solar system, stars began blowing up, disintegrating. And that, this is called the Golden One story, soulinvitation.com/origins. And there, having discovered that star systems are blowing up, they went backwards in time to try to find the root of the problem. And they traveled backwards in time until they arrived at our time epoch here on Earth and discovered genetic engineering. And they discovered that when we started cutting up DNA from Sumeria till now, that was the beginning of the problem of stars falling apart. So a direct connection between DNA that's not set free and stars falling apart. Now that story, the Golden Ones, ends with those advanced high-winged dragons going backwards in time about 300 years in Groundhog Day motion to weld themselves back onto their own DNA and establish Sumeria to fix the bloodline of their own mistake. Like Groundhog Day, let's get it right now, let's get it right now. DNA is here for something. Maybe we shouldn't hack it up. Because DNA is required to make stars work. Now we want to understand more about the depth of that story, and that's kind of where we're going with this. We're saying that gene pools make a substance which is critical to stellar evolution. Which something like when Doris Lessing says in the Sufi tradition, in the Syrian experiments and Briefing for a Descent into Hell, if you've looked at any of Doris Lessing's Sufi books, she said, human condition makes something called the substance of we feeling, which is a sticky substance which holds things together. Ooh, what is this substance? So we're looking at this mystery of the importance of creating gene pools to inhabit stars, otherwise they fall apart. Another example we'll get to later in our story is in Atlantis, when they used the Tuoi stone, the fire crystal, to enslave people, and they phase-locked their grid. Immediately after a large number of people were enslaved, huge earthquakes occurred in which the tectonic plates fell apart and gravity destabilized. And I'm suggesting that there's a direct electrical connection between large numbers of people that are enslaved, and therefore their electric aura is no longer self-steering, and as a result their gravity field falls apart. A direct connection. That's what we're investigating here. Yes, so Atlantis fell literally because a whole race of people had been enslaved, and so gravity could no longer be self-organizing. What is the meaning of that part of the story? We want to investigate the role of DNA in the evolution of stars. This is the background now, okay? So now.
Quick question.
Yes.
If what your premise there is true, would not the same thing happen, say, in the States in the 1800s and, say, in the Roman Empire, where there's also a large number of enslaved people?
It's interesting. The ends of many empires of large numbers of enslaved people involve perhaps tectonic and other natural disasters. That the electric environment of the whole biosphere is destabilized toward chaos, specifically when gene pools become enslaved. When people no longer become self-directing psychologically because their aura is no longer imploding to suck in charge to enable them to steer their own aura, the result of that enslavement is chaos electrically, including the destabilization of gravity. So we're suggesting that biology at the high end of fractal evolution, remember we ended our story well, we ended our story by saying the fractality was evolving, right? And fractality reaches a kind of climax in DNA itself. And now we're saying that charge self-similarity, fractality, is the cause of gravity. And fractality and charge self-similarity reaches a maxima in evolution in DNA itself. Therefore, obviously, DNA is one of the most potent gravity makers among the stars. So, we want to investigate this story so we can understand the potential of our own gene pool, and for that reason we're taking this time to tell the story of the galactic core cultures seeding stars with DNA. What was their agenda, what were their methods, and how did this result in the Orion Wars? That's where we are at this moment.
Back up like 3 sentences.
Sure. So we're talking about the fact that DNA was at the top of the evolutionary ladder of evolving fractality. And since now we hypothesize that that charged self-similarity, fractality, is the cause of gravity, that indeed DNA is one of the highest leverage gravity makers, naturally self-organizing gravity makers among stars. We're going with this obviously is when our ancestors said the only ETs that are worth talking to are onto the sun gods. And they're the ones whose DNA, there's electric field of presence arrived through the heart of the sun. So if they came, your friendly ETs arrived in heavy metal, you know they're from the wrong side of the tracks. They're messy. They're parasites. Whereas if they arrived through the heart of the sun, they're interesting. Talk to them. They're called sun gods. So Tuatha De Danann, Antu, Anunnaki, all these words with An in it, Daniel, means sun god. So who the heck is a sun god? It's obviously someone whose biologic charge field is able to inhabit the heart of a star and stabilize the gravity there. That's the motion that was demonstrated when Uri Geller measured that focused human attention measurably reduces radioactive half-life. Yes? So obviously radioactivity is the opposite of the fractality that holds the atom together. And you can restore that fractality with human attention. It's simple physics, since Bill Tiller measured, in fact, that human attention compresses charge. Now we know why. So, in the big picture of these things, we have to grow up to inhabit stars or we can't grow up. That's the hypothesis. And we're looking at the electrical nature of that evolution, and we're trying to piece together the history. Okay, now, history story. The story is that among the galactic core cultures, there evolved a disagreement or a difference of opinion about the best way to seed stars with DNA. In other words, there we are going around. It said, for example, that the Dracu had seeded 300 star systems in the Orion sector with DNA. And there was a disagreement about the best way to grow up. It's just like a disagreement among farmers about the best way to fertilize their crop. Yeah? And this agreement came to be called Aku-Dracu. Akhenaten, Draco, Draco. Which is parallel to the story of Ophanim and Seraphim and Lucifer, Aramonic, Michaelic versus Luciferic. So this difference of opinion became in religious history called the war in heaven. And this difference of opinion became fractal then later when we're on Sirius A and we have a certain family. The grandfather was called Alalu, and he was a former king, and a guy named Anu, or Antu, had a little wrestling match in which he cut off the balls of the former king Alalu, and this guy became king, Antu, on Sirius A. Now, we're picking a certain time in this evolution, in this story, to freeze a fractal of these giant Orion wars. And the time we're picking is the story of Sirius A and the evolution of the Nibiru story, Nibiru. So how did we get from here to here? Okay. What's happening here is that a culture that we can call Draco, or in a large sense reptilian, and we know there are lots of different branches of the reptilian culture. And believe me, we're not saying that all reptiles are bad. That's not the point here at all. But that the Draco reptilian culture had conquered a high percentage of the inhabitable planetoids in the Orion sector. This is the background of our story. And in the ancient times, this dragon race, which is called Seraphim or Uru. And Uru means giant or ancient dragon one, as in Uru Shalayim, which is Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem. And Uru Asa LM is the place where the female queens of, Asa means female queen of, Uru means ancient dragon one in the sense of Ursprung, or Uruan, or Roman, or Dine Asa Ura, dinosaur, or Asa Uru of Asuras, or Azores. That all comes from this ancient root, Asa Uru. These are the ancient dragon queens, yeah? Asa Uru, yeah? And this bloodline was also in the sense of the ancestor of the An, or sun god. You have the winged high dragons, high seraphim, who were called archon, in the sense of archangel, and literally archon-saw, literally. Bill Clinton, Arkansas, that's the root, archon. And archon here meant, you could think of it as winged dragon or high dragon. And later these became part of the Siakar story, and you can research the term Siakar, which also means winged dragon, and it relates, for example, to the movie and story about the Mothmen.
They were allowed to eat the monatomic gold from the ark.
They had access to the monoatomic gold, yes, but that's moving on in our story, but we will get there.
It's like making a drone into a bee, right? It's food.
These were, for example, it is said that the giant lenticular clouds, extremely organized clouds that look like living beings you see over Mount Shasta, that these are the precipitant electric charge field of a winged dragon. Yeah? And the winged dragon guarding a giant dragon's egg, Humpty Dumpty, at Bucharest is one of these. They're trying to fix their eggs so they can get Humpty Dumpty back, you know. And that egg is, in fact, the ability to reassemble DNA to implosion. We talked about the physics of how an egg gets charge from gravity and gets a soul, so they're trying to fix Humpty Dumpty's egg, the dragon's egg story. So these are the high dragons. So the high side of the dragon is becomes the story of Aku versus Draku, Ophanim, the Luciferic, and the winged ones. This, in the local part of this story, becomes Ibi versus Uru. Ibi meaning bird, and Uru meaning snake. You ask the Aboriginals who the two brothers were of the ancient gods. It's the bird god and the snake god. And when the bird holds the snake, and so we have a remnant of the bird brain, which needs to be fed by the snake brain, so the bird has to hold the snake by the throat and pump the juice, the venom, the testosterone. And when the snake brain feeds the bird brain, Quetzalcoatl returns. A description of Kundalini, basically. So all of this is in the genetic ancestry here that we need to understand the local politics thereof. And the basic story here, and by the way, this is kind of the story of wingmakers.com here as well. For those of you who are familiar with a wingmaker is someone who makes this, at wingmakers.com, and the solution in Wingmakers is something they call BST, which is blank state technology, interactive dynamic time travel. Only that can resist the arrival of the great parasite ETs, right? If we have the right kind of shaman, our gene pool gets an immune system. Well, they think that the interactive dynamic time travel here, which is the only defense we have against great parasite ETs, they think it's an electrical problem, but it's really a psychological problem. A shaman that has the chutzpah, to travel in time, you know, wake up and fix the near future without screwing up the near past. That's called a tron.
Or in other words, quit blaming someone else and take responsibility for your own mess.
Well, but also in this sense, specifically a tron in the sense of Metatron or electron. A tron refers to the ability to turn the cross through the speed of light fast enough that in your lucid dream, when you see how to go to the past to fix the future, you can see both at once fast enough so the time cops don't catch you. I mean, so that the event histories, if you meet yourself in the past and mess with it, then you screwed with yourself in the future, and you are screwed. Phase conjugation is how you got there. It's kind of a long story. But anyway, to have the beingness to do that kind of interactive dynamic time travel is a really high-level shaman. Their electric field is time penetrant. These are also called time lords. And we know that the time lord is busily engaged in repairing the fractal nature of time. Remember, time only describes rotation, and spiral calendar proves that event histories fit a golden mean spiral. So if you want miracles, synchronicity in your life, fix the event histories to fit a golden spiral in time, and then it will emerge from chaos, and you'll see miracles, synchronicity, Carl Jung. So a time lord has the agenda, which later became the Templar agenda, for the repair of the fabric of time. So this is kind of advanced background material. So we can start on our
Wait a
local.
second, you just flashed through something there about the Templar function of the Time Lords.
The Templars, this is William
Yeah, I
Bueller.
know you got it, Francois.
William Bueller, whose website I do for the Templar Thoth group out of Crestone, is constantly talking about the repair of the fabric of time. We'll show some of the pictures in the grid engineering section, which is the climax of today's story. But the reason they have to fix the fabric of time, like you got a big bleeding wound in the fabric of time from Montauk, and all these grays come rushing in, the parasites, because time isn't fractal enough anymore when they cause it to bleed. And so it sounds complicated, but it's really quite simple. If your DNA was imploding and you're sending a signal through the speed of light, when you go faster than the speed of light, you must inhabit time. You would get here before the Earth got here next year in the rotation of the solar system. That's how you travel in time. Acceleration is time travel. Yeah? And so in the same way that space must be fractal to be inhabitable, also must time. Yeah? Okay. Again, introduction to some of the advanced concepts, but Ron asked that we do some of the advanced stuff in this course, so here we are.
Right on, Dan. Is this where we go from 2012 to 28? Just because
Well, the fractality of time is what has to be corrected there, and the Mayan day keepers missed a few things, and that's part of the mystery. Exactly.
I think he stopped being condescending.
I'm sorry. No, it wasn't condescension. It was just, how much can we do in one day? But let's see. So we're trying to set the context here. We're trying to set the context now that in this culture, the philosophy of this side, the family, the Dracu. Now remember, a seraphim is a high dragon, and a high seraphim has wings, Archon Siakar. And the other side, the family, is specifically known as bird tribe. This is the return of the bird tribe here. Ebi, bird tribe, Ophanic, Aku, all synonyms really. In Iroquois, they're called bird tribe. In Cherokee, they're called Adawi. In Aboriginal Australia, in the Adnyamatna tribe, they're called Valnapa. An Apa and Apta. And this became the family line, which the Andromedans called Pa-Tal. Wings with a tail, which became our word later in Egypt, Ptah.
These two sounds, ah, ooh.
That's right, that's right. Ah, ooh. And, but the PT in here was associated with pterodactyl and winged snake and reptile. The PT also refers to sept, sevenness. So PT is very profound there. The Patal. The Andromedans call this, they call this 11th dimensional DNA. That's the way they describe it. In Alex Collier's letter from Andromeda.com, which I worked with him personally fairly extensively. And so we can see, now we said, look, when the DNA finishes the 7th braid, it becomes 12 axis spin, 5 plus 7. So here the 11th, and they say this is the ancestors of Enki, whom we're about to talk about. So this is where we're going with this story, right here. So now in the local politics, where we have a fractal of these wars, the two sons of Antu, by different mothers, become Enlil, Enki and Enlil. And because this family contained a good fractal of these giant wars, you could breed a vaccine here, see? Now, we need to set the local story here for what happened. Here, this...
You said two different mothers from Anu.
That's exactly where we're going. The mother... The mother from Enki was Ida, and she was from Rigel in Orion, and she had blue blood.
Same name as Akhenaten's wife.
Atun, Ida, Akhenaten's wife. Thank you. Very nice. Whereas Enlil's mother, by the same father, Anu, was called Urash. Uru Asa. Is there a clue there? Right? And the story, the famous story was that, I want to tell a little more of the background before I tell this part of the story. The background is that these two halves of the family, they had a different philosophy about how to grow up DNA. In this half of the family, they believed the way to grow up DNA was to prevent it from changing. So on this side of the family, DNA that changes is by definition weak. Okay? And that's basically the fallen Dracu, at least on the fallen side. Now remember, a small portion of the Seraphim High Dragon bloodline, only a small portion of it, had a genetic disaster, which is loss of implosion in DNA, loss of ensoulment, called Nephilim. No phi in them, Nephilim. Okay? So only a small part of the giant dragon family had that genetic disaster, but the rest of the family of the Seraphim were heartbroken about the mess. Okay? And so how this genetic disaster happened, the Nephilim, the fall, is a big part of our story. And the Nephilim story is in part this family. So how did this genetic disaster happen? Remember, on this side of the family, they had evolved to a situation where preventing DNA from changing was the agenda.
So lack of evolution, lack of mutation.
That's right. That to prevent mutation, you kept elaborate genetic records. And the Seraphim genetic records are called the Mormon tablets, for example. And this is a culture designed to prevent DNA from morphing, basically.
So basically it's extreme inbreeding, which...
That's reptilian, yes. And so, but another aspect of that was that this reptilian DNA he brought was recessive. It had to be inbred, so that both fits here. So we want to understand first what was the philosophy of the two halves of the family. On this side, if you plant a forest, your reason for planting a forest was to plan to cut it down. On this side of the family, if you plant a forest, your reason for planting the DNA was to plan to set it free in order to learn from it. Now I'm oversimplifying here, but that's basically a difference in philosophy, yeah? It's a farmer's philosophy. Yeah? So here, the harvest procedure is quite different.
But it's also right brain and left brain.
In a way, it's many things. And remember, this is an overgeneralization, and this is an archetype, and we're not here to insult anybody, but we're trying to understand the history, yeah? So, on these sides of the family, this side of the family began to, well, actually, the story is that the galactic core cultures planted the Dracu in the Orion sector because it was a long way from downtown. No. Actually, well, really, not that it was a bad place. Actually, it was just such a place that required a fierceness in order to survive. In fact, you know, the family later asked, well, why did you put the Dracu here in our Orion sector? We don't like them. And the galactic core culture said, look, the Orion sector was such a tough place to settle that you needed fierce survival instincts. And the Dracu had fierce survival instincts. So they had a reason for putting the Dracu in the Orion sector. Well, anyway, the local history was then that they began, and this story is told in, I'm running out of space on this board here, in the book Guardians of the Grail by Robert Morningsky, Guardians of the Grail, okay? And Morningsky is reporting on the Hopi history they learned from the ETs. And they're reporting on the evolution of the Asa Uru, the feared and dreaded Asa Uru, right? And what he's saying here is that the Dracu line had conquered, using later fear and terror, most of the inhabitable planetoids of the Orion sector. And the only culture that they encountered which could resist them was called the bird dog, which became Dogon, which became Weolawa. And the bird dog culture is basically this culture. And Antu, here on Sirius A, has a piece of the bird dog culture. This is the contrast bird tribe versus the dog, the reptile tribe. And so a treaty was set forward that could end these Orion Wars. Because by that time, they had killed the Lyran civilization, if you read Prism of Lyra, which had millions of humanoids that died the day they blew up the whole Lyran star system. And the women on Lyra who had red hair were valued because the extra iron solubility made psychokinesis. And this became the story of the witches, and there's lots of pieces of that puzzle here. So we have some smiles back there. So, so the day the Lyran civilization was blown up here, it was realized that a truce was needed in the Orion Wars, and that truce involved that the bird dog kings would accept in marriage an assigned telepathic Orion Queen Asa Uru, Reverend Mother, who would report telepathically back to the ruling culture on the activities of the bird dog king. So now, if you see the role of Reverend Mothers in Dune, and Dune has more accurate history than the Bible, honestly, it's true. So the bird dog king, in this case Anu, had to accept a marriage with a hive mind telepathic queen, Ida.
So you just passed through something there that seemed very significant. The whole not wanting to change genetics, was that to create a hive mind?
Actually, remember,
Because the closer to the morphic resonance, i.e. ants, bees, whatever, the more hive mind you're going to create.
That's the right question. This all has to do with what's the difference between individuation versus hive mind. That's this whole story. Or Borg mentality. So the whole story is about that, so we should investigate that a little bit. Remember, in the ancient Seraphim culture, this is a very high culture. Their charged fields are so coherent that they can steer star systems. These are the time navigators, the high-winged dragons. This was a powerful culture. But in the process of this fall, they lost track of the pure principle that allowed DNA to implode and get ignited with bliss. Remember, the title of our story is Ignition of DNA. So, in the process of losing track of what was keeping DNA on fire, there was desperation. How do we keep our DNA from decaying? Oh, let's make genetic records of the history of the last million years and keep track so the DNA doesn't decay anymore. This is the Seraphim. This is who Joseph Smith was talking to at the Origin of the Mormons, right? We must track our DNA so it doesn't fall apart even more. Oh my God. Oh, goodness that we should ever set it free. That would be scary. Well, it isn't. So this was a failure to recognize the primal intelligence of DNA, obviously. This was an insult to DNA. But the insult to DNA that resulted in hive mind, do you know why total telepathy prevents compassion? If you, yes.
Perceiver,
We don't need to feel.
Yeah, it's all good. Excellent. Very good answer. Very good. Go to the head of the class, Ron.
Thank you.
Yes. If you never feel separate, you can't feel the agony of what it is to be separate, and so you can't experience the need for compassion, which initiates the turning inside out, the feeling, precisely. So in this culture, they had evolved an extreme telepathy. And that telepathy is related to the gold powder story, which we're about to get to. So, let's see if I put my gold powder in here. I did, I thought. The gold powder. Ooh, the gold powder story. So, the problem of the advancing telepathy and the decay of individuation had everything to do with the addiction to the real gold powder. And that's what we must understand here in terms of the cause of the Nephilim fall. That's where we're going with this story. So, the wars had been murderous. This culture had welded themselves to too much metal. They had evolved a technology to create a form of immortality. The suspensors around Harkonnen, Ariel, Sharon in life support, same physics, yeah? This is a Borg phenomena. And,
That's so great.
yeah, and so they were now using metallic systems to support DNA, but the direct result of that was DNA stopped imploding. So suddenly they've got an evolved technology involving metal to prevent aging, but their DNA keeps decaying faster. Oh my God, they got a problem. So in this culture, originally, when a high telepathic dragon queen, Asa Uru, containing thousands of generations of genetic memory, was ready to die, 10,000 years these dragons would live to be, 5 to 10,000 years. When she was ready to die, she would normally pass on her hive mind memory to the next queen with a skull touch, in which a spark, piezoelectric bone, passed, called Baphomet. And the new queen would enter a swoon and would wake up with the dream with 1,000 generations of tribal memory. When they lost the ability to have that level of charge density and bliss, they began to use quartz crystal skulls to do that, which sadly were not implosive and became control devices and was evidence of the problem, not the solution, actually. Yes? Because remember, the electrical signature of quartz is hex. The SiO2 bond is a cubic lattice with a hex top view of the quartz helix and is non-implosive, and that's the problem, not the solution. Which is why people who use just the quartz bowls actually have astral hygiene problems, whereas people who use quartz with gold maybe have a little bit more of the potential implosion. Anyway, we digress. So another aspect of this part of the story was that their way of producing psychoactive kids, star navigators, guild navigators, those who could make gravity in their genes, their technique for evolving the advanced ones involved feeding them something called the oil of Messe. Messe means crocodile juice, and it was the reptilian juice. It was a highly psychoactive, melatonin, serotonin-rich menstrual blood called starfire. And this menstrual blood's name, Messe, is the origin of our word Messiah. A Messiah is one who has been fed the oil of Messe. And it serves the function exactly of royal jelly in a beehive. So kids who get that high melatonin, serotonin-rich menstrual blood evolve an explosion of growth in the high glands at a very young age and become gravity-making star navigators, highly psychoactive, shamanic, etc., etc. Their high gland structure gets extremely well nourished. Yeah? So this was a way of breeding the leaders of the dragon tribe. The part of the skill that required to generate this was an advanced lineage of what we could call Vestal virgins, who were women who had access to bliss. And their access to bliss process in the temple, which is a capacitor, allowed their blood to be fired, and they could make this starfire. Sadly, they lost the skill to keep that culture alive, and so there was no more melatonin, serotonin in that blood, and their Messiah culture began to decay, and they needed a substitute. Okay? The substitute was the gold powder. Now, the physics is that the gold atom's outer valence electron shell structure we discussed yesterday is dodecaecosa. It is profoundly fractal and implosive in the very name of chem. In alchemy means access to the black hole made by charged self-similarity. And the chem was a name for that bloodline, the blue-black ones, how Egypt got its name. And so the gold atom became stable in the monoatomic state in the presence of fractal capacitance. So if you've ever been in a powerful pyramid, and I was in one in Danville, and you see a thin film of gold, and you can see white powder form on the surface, that the gold atom becomes stable monoatomically in the presence of fractality. And it turns inside out electrically, changes mass measurably, changes from yellow to white, becomes soluble in blood and water. It's called ormes in modern chemistry, orthomolecularly rearranged gold. It's David Hudson's physics, and Lawrence Gardner has described that extensively in his book, The Sacred Ark. And that substance would form a kind of substitute for this starfire. And it's true that if you eat the gold powder, your eyes turn blue and you live forever, supposedly. but they maybe missed the fine print on the medicine bottle, may cost you your soul. And that's what we want to discuss. If you want to touch it, you're welcome to do that. But I warn you that it's painful. That it's electrically, it can burn your aura if you're sensitive. And this, the nature of implosion here is chemically induced. So yes, your DNA gets the phase conjugation to go through a black hole, but the phase conjugation path is mechanically induced and therefore painful. Yeah. So this is the real David Hudson's generated monatomic gold. Now, when you eat the stuff, what happens is your DNA's electric field is induced externally toward fractality, and it induces implosion in the DNA. The mechanical result is that you hear your ears ring, like Kundalini onset, but the ringing is mechanically induced. The normal ears ringing is called sangreal, sound current sung in the blood, and it is the voices of your ancestors. The problem is that if you get too many radio stations and you haven't built the tuner, that's called schizophrenia. And so this is what happens when you get the gold powder addiction. You get all these radio stations in your DNA, but you don't have the beingness implosively to be the tuner, and the result, as Thoth diagnosed, is called fractionation of the personality. Thoth Hermes narrated a series of exercises that could allow you to build the inner muscles to eat a bit of gold powder without fractionation of the personality. But there's no substitute for the inner work necessary to build your own charge. So any sustainably, externally induced implosion is always going to be addictive and not self-empowering. And gold powder then is more the problem than the solution. And so Lawrence Gardner gets it completely wrong in The Sacred Ark, where to him, gold powder is the solution, not the problem. So this is where we want to look at this. We're not saying there's not a role for gold powder, but we're saying its use needs to be understood in great electrical detail before it can be done safely. The Chinese, for example, would eat a thin film of gold on their cake. And it does have profound colloidal gold function, and a little bit is useful to biology, but it's tricky. And they didn't understand all this very well, sorry. They really didn't understand. So, Zechariah Sitchin says, the reason they came here to mine the gold, looking for a heart of gold, because they were growing old. Zechariah Sitchin says, the reason they came here to mine the gold was because they were using it to repair the home atmosphere. Which is true, and good physics, but it's essentially a cover story. More importantly, they were eating the gold. It's called manna in the Bible, the spice in Dune. It was served in a round white wafer, which is the origin of Holy Communion. And eating white wheat flour is pretty stupid, I think. Anyway. So the ability to create the chemistry to do this became later the Ark of the Covenant story and the banking economy of the Essenes. So now we've set this background. Now we can understand a little bit more about what's happening on Sirius A. Sirius A is a culture that's under the thumb of the Dracu. But on Antu, the king is sympathetic to the remnant humanoid culture that has survived in the migrations from the Lyran Wars. So now I'm going to show you a slide from Stuart Swerdlow from his experience at Montauk and the various ET races involved in cooking up Earth DNA. And this is an excerpt from my article, soulinvitation.com/invasion. And I'm going to show you the 12 primary, I think it's 12, primary ET races involved in cooking up Earth DNA. Can't see it very well, I'll read it for you. So this is called the Founders of the Galactic Federation, over 110 colonies, roughly associated with what we're calling the galactic core cultures here. Yeah? And here is the original galactic civilization, kind of a humanoid home. Some say some of this DNA actually came from Earth way far back. But anyway, there's a huge humanoid civilization here that was wiped out when the Draco, the Alpha Draconis, had this war, and millions died here. And there was a diaspora, and escapees, the humanoid remnant, went to all these Rigel, Procyon, Arcturus, Antares, there's Nordic, there's Tau Ceti, we should have, yeah, Procyon. Procyon and Tau Ceti were non-interventionist. The Sirius A was called non-interventionist, but they would sell guns to both sides of the war any day. Anyway, you see here the Sirius A is the primary origin of Egypt and the Hebrews. And this is kind of where we're telling this part of the story. Okay, the Sirius A, origin of Egypt and the Hebrew. This is where we are with right here. Okay? The story is that this culture here had intended that the genetic influences on Earth would actually be a fractal of the Orion Wars, so they could breed a vaccine. That's the story. And the story is that Enki was actually forced to be harmonically inclusive in his genetic experiments here for political reasons back here. But that's backing up in our story. We want to tell the local story. The local story is here that Antu, because of his sympathy with the remnant humanoids who were losing. Remember, here now, the Empire is striking back. Antu does something illegal in this Draco culture, and that is he creates a DNA that is more psychoactive than is allowed. And so he is concerned about the Empire striking back, and in fact, this is the Terminator story. It's quite real here, actually. So the rest of this story about the bloodline of Enki and all the major civilizations of Earth and the Empire striking back has roots back here. Yeah. So Anu is sympathetic. The humanoids are losing. They lost. They're in bad shape. The Asa Uru are winning. They're a mechanical culture, female-dominated, telepathy-ruled, highly metallic, and they are not interested in evolving more psychoactive DNA. From their point of view, a psychoactive DNA, a highly powerful shaman, could mess up the computer on a starship warship, and that's not good. So we got to keep these psychoactive humanoids from evolving. This is more the fallen Nephilim point of view. The high culture here is totally aware that you've got to set DNA free or your stars are going to fall apart. But the Nephilim here have these misunderstandings. Oops. And this is what we need to fix by understanding this. So now we're telling this little part of the story so we can see how this politic became Earth. Anu, because he's sympathetic with the humanoids who have lost, agrees to a marriage, the assigned telepath from the Orion Queen Asa Uru, Ida. And Ida is from Rigel in Orion, and she has blue blood, winged Patal, 11th dimensional DNA. And so, meantime, Anu's regular wife, Urash, they have a son who is Enlil. There's some argument whether he came first or second, but he got the brotherhood primacy. He gets assigned politically to be in charge of the Earth experience later, because he is the elder in the Anunnaki numbering system to say who is the first son. But meantime, Anu's wife, Ida, produces Enki, who has some DNA that's high winged dragon, Patal, Quetzalcoatl. The whole winged dragon story comes from right here, the blood there. This is the bullet in the furnace. This blood behind Enki. Now Enki is not exactly a hero. He's a klutz. He rushes in where angels fear to tread, makes messes all the time. He's a rebel. He could be a double Scorpio. He could qualify. But he does have some very interesting DNA. So what happens is that Ida, meantime... Pardon? Harrison Ford. Perfect. Yeah, you got the image, man. Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail. He's looking for the chessboard. And the chessboard of the Holy Grail is the genetic diversity to ignite DNA. And everybody suddenly, pop, gets immortal. Phase conjugate and travel back to the near past. So, anyway.
Who is his father?
Pardon?
Who is his father?
Dad is Anu. This is Dad. Dad, Antu, the king on Sirius A, is the father of both Enki and Enlil, but there's different mothers. This is called East of Eden. which is the name of the town I was born in.
Different mother.
Yeah. Same dad, different mother, east of Eden, the whole story. And my brother's name was Michael. It really sort of fits. Anyway, so Ida gets jealous. The fact that Anu and Urash actually have a love relationship. Whereas Ida is basically an assigned queen there to do the telepath reporting back. And she was not actually supposed to have a kid. That's explained in Dune, yeah? Who was the father in Dune? Leto. He was not supposed to have a kid there. That was not part of the plan. These Reverend Mothers said, "Ah, you did something illegal having a psychoactive kid. Oh my goodness." So Anu knows that he has to hide the psychoactive son, Enki. So anyway, Ida gets jealous of Urash and arranged for her to basically get killed. Enlil's not very happy about the fact that his mother got murdered by the half-wife. This is bad news. So you have a little bad blood between the brothers here. Do you see that? This is an ancient root. If you want to do shamanic recapitulation here, you need to know the family story. So what evolved here was Anu now has 2 sons and he has lots of problems. His solution to this, first of all, Sirius A and the complex there is losing its atmosphere, and the gene pool is losing its implosion, so he has more problems than he can shake a stick at, man. The guy's in trouble. But he persuades this culture to spend lots of money for an artificial genetic engineering planet called Nibiru, which is basically a metal artificial planet that's towed in behind asteroids. And in this case, it's a gold mining genetic engineering planet. And he learns that back on Earth, there's gold in them thar hills. Remember that not only was the Earth's, remember, I don't know if we
didn't talk about that.
We didn't talk about that. We have to talk about that. So
Location.
that's exactly where we're going. Thank you very much. You got the kids are ahead of me. I like that. That's perfectly fine. So gold and psychoactive DNA both require star systems that are fractal. So you don't get gold and psychoactive DNA unless you got fractal star systems. So thanks for reminding me we didn't look at this yet. So here is the Japanese woodcut. Here is the 3-dimensional gravity wind that is the Orion sector. 2 light cones, Yod and Va. Yod and Va. 2 light cones, Ontarian conversion. Here's Rigel, here's Alnitak, Alanam, and Nantaka. Alnilam is called the central belt star, Telos 1 or Stargate 1, Bellatrix, Betelgeuse. And this is Rigel, Enki's mom's home. And so that electrical geometry, well, later we see that it's projected in flatland on Giza, 300 places on the Giza Plateau that map the Orion star map. There's a reason for that. It's a lens to project the charge field of group bliss by morphic resonance back into the home in the stars. So like the Romans built roads, the ETs built roads home. This is a road home, yeah? Alpha Draconis at Angkor Wat, and you have the Orion star map, and obviously the 3 belt stars of Orion perfectly fit the 3 pyramids alignment, and the center of the heart of Orion is pregnant. Stars are being born there at an alarming rate. So this becomes a morph structure in which I play the little animation. So if you were going into a lucid dream in the Great Pyramid and need your aura steered to a place in the stars, your aura seeks the place by morphic resonance that could... Here is the point we're making. I better stop this here. So remember, here's our implosion cone. And here, the solar system is right there. So if you calculate the right angle and declination astronomically, Pleiades and Sirius are at a 60-degree right angle declination with respect to the solar system. That's called, and here's Orion straight at the midheaven. You should recognize that cone by now. That should be familiar to you. This arrangement of stellar masses into the geometry of recursion creates a gravity wind which the Hopis called Pesh Me 10, 1 less than 10, the way of the 9, the Deep Space 9, and the 9 Atun who taught the writer of Star Wars, yeah, with Phyllis Schlemmer. So this gravity wind was navigable by these star navigators genetically, and this was a trade wind to motorize commerce among stars. Big bucks here. Money is to be made. You remember in Deep Space Nine? Location, location, location. The solar system had access to the fractality. So not only could you breed more gold, because gold only occurs where ley lines cross in a fractal, but in planets like that, you could breed DNA that could get more psychokinetic. Very valuable real estate, worth fighting over. So, anyway, I just finished a little animation since it's so much fun. You can see how that ability to enter that compression wave became the political agenda of the various Orion star maps. And we're going to show the other Orion star maps in a minute. But you see this embedding process here, navigating to the heart of Orion, and we won't play this whole animation, but just see that astronomically, this is pregnant. So obviously you're going to need a lot of gene pools to be squirted into here to create the gravity force to suck star births into sustainability. So whole gene pools are needed to inhabit the heart of Orion, because it is from there that star births can be made sustainable. In the high angelic magic, this would be called the birth of angels, the real Ophanum advanced. This is the movie Stargate. Again, advanced stuff. But so that geometry became Orion star map in the American Southwest. See Papu. This is again the Orion star map in the American Southwest. And this is the symbol called Antarian conversion, the universal symbol for Orion. And you see where that came from. We discussed this. There's a light cone. Too many movies, too little time. We're going to do him. We're going to do Stefan Cardino tomorrow. But here, see this? This is called Ontarian conversion. And this is a gravity wind. Yeah?
Do you do
the universal
crossbones do that?
The skull and bones, maybe we'll bring that in. The skull and bones story is that serpents of Fucus have the shape of skull and bones. And if you know a little bit about the astronomy, that the serpens of Fucus is literally the 13th house of the zodiac. And Fucus. And that is, if you take 12 spheres around one, the 13th sphere is perfectly centered. It makes a cube octa. But if you jitterbug the cube octa to the acosa, the 13th sphere melts into the other 12, the Christed one. And so serpens of Fucus was the symbol skull and bones. And we can come back to that later in our story. You can see where that might come in.
Do you have that slide in the books that you have, or in the CD you gave out?
Yes, this is all soulinvitation.com/Orion, which is on your CD, although this is a slightly updated version thereof, but yes. So you can begin to see the background of this story here, that they discovered that the Earth, being so fractal, has gold in them, our hills, and now they realize that their atmosphere is going away, and they think gold is the fix, and their DNA's implosion is going away, and they think gold is the fix. So they need the gold. So he persuades the Seraphim culture to spend a lot of money on an artificial mining planetoid, and manages to hide his son's psychokinesis on board. In the first and second trip, I think Enki alone goes later. Enki and Enlil both go. And they arrive here and start the genetic engineering and gold mining operations called Sumeria. Sumer, by the way, means dragon in many cultures. S-U-M-M-A-I-R-E. As does Sanat Kumara. K-H-U Kumara. A Kumara, Kumodo is a dragon. Yeah. Kama Sutra. Kam Asa-u. Yeah? So, this ancient culture had arrived here with a genetic problem. Now, the standard order mining equipment there was the paramagnetic stone skill to use dolmen, a capacitor, to arrange them. And we talked about that if you put 6 powerful paramagnetic stones in the right symmetry embedded in the land, you can create an electric field that prevents cellular aging. And that was called Garden of Eden. The reason Sitchin says Eden means spaceport, but actually he doesn't understand how capacitance inhibits aging. And that's very important because, in fact, when they arrived here, they were expecting to live to be 5 to 10,000 years old. They arrived in the atmosphere of Earth, and suddenly, they're aging really fast. Oops. So they needed to discover how to prevent that aging. Sadly, this technology came from Sirius A, ability to build capacitors to prevent aging, and basically they forgot how to use it, the klutzes. Because one of the symptoms of this Nephilim fall, remember, the Nephilim fall has many symptoms. Loss of long-term memory was one of them.
Alzheimer's.
Basically. And loss of ability to lucid dream, loss of ability to take memory through death, loss of ability electrically to radiate capacitance to make an immune system in their babies.
Heavy metal contamination.
Yeah, exactly. That would be related. So, for example, when the Dracos screwed with the Khmer, the reticulum, which we call the Greys, they lost the ability to make an immune system in their babies. I mean, it's bad news, and we're going in that direction real fast as a gene pool, unless we learn these lessons.
So they came down here and they had a hard time with the atmosphere.
Yes.
This is from another line of story that I know. That means they had to go into high elevations, so that's why they went to Tibet, that's why they went to Machu Picchu, that's why they went to high elevation places to live, because there's less atmosphere.
Yes, that's a good thought. And also, those are the places more likely perhaps to have caves where the capacitance was fractal enough to keep the DNA alive. So a dragon in a cave breathing fire is actually someone whose DNA is charge implosive enough to breathe capacitance, to breathe charge. Yeah, and so the whole story of this culture, again, is about igniting DNA, the title of our story, igniting DNA. That was the whole crux of their issue. So that brings us to the local politics now. We come to this situation where, yes?
And that's the whole harmonic convergence, this thing coming up in 2012 or a few years earlier, the alignment of the planets such that these...
Harmonic convergence is a crude name for harmonic inclusive implosion. So when harmonics can be inclusive, it's basically because of golden ratio making implosion. So harmonic convergence means how could harmonics converge, and the physics is clear. It has to be implosion. So yes, very much, yes.
I was trying to get clear exactly what it was that caused the Nephilim.
The Nephilim.
Nephilim to go into the fallen state. Was
Yes.
their life, like their lifestyle being too technologically oriented? Was that the cause, or was there an event, a cause of
There's
event?
genetic disease.
There is a story told by a dragon queen. Her name is Corinna Muller from Milan, and had memory. And she claims to recall a particular battle in the Dracu culture where, they were fiercely survivalistic and warrior-like. And in that particular battle, they suffered what was akin to a nuclear blast that mutated their gene pool. And at that point, instead of having one heart, they had two hearts. We know in Phil Schneider and others' personal reports of the Draco at Dulce that they had two hearts and were highly telepathic, hard to kill. And the split heart was, in some ways, an end to the possibility of real compassion. And this is repeated in some of the myths, so that's a piece of the story. Another piece of the story is the loss of bliss making in the blood for the Vestal Virgin culture, and addiction to gold powder, and use of too much metal in their environment. And all of those things cause DNA to lose charge.
2 stars, 2 hearts.
2 stars, 2 hearts, twinning. So we had 2 comments here. One is that about the money aspect. Classically, this culture then becomes a culture that regards harvesting DNA like banking. And so the origin of banking insurance, which is credited to the Templars, actually came from the Dracu, who were harvesting hundreds of planetoids in a similar way. And this, your story about creating a gene pool that then rebels, this culture creates at least 3 different gene pool experiments on Earth And like the Lemurian, they basically get out of control and get away and escape from the matrix. And
Does
so,
that mean you don't go through the sun? Just take the longer route and go somewhere else?
well, the humanoids who escaped, the Lemurian story is the humanoids won, Lim Uru. The humanoids won against the Uru by a nuclear blast which destroyed the atmosphere. And so the remnant humanoids had to go underground, and their blood is said to have changed from green to red, chlorophyll to heme, because they no longer had the access to the oxygen, and they had to use iron to fix oxygen in blood. And that's where we got the Adamic race, which is the next one, which means red man or iron man. So the first attempt, the Lemurian, is actually a genetic experiment that got away from the Dracu culture, escaped the matrix. And this series of rebellions is described in several books, actually. So yes, creating a gene pool that then gets away. And so there are many reasons politically why Enki is legally required not to give too much psychokinesis to his genetic experiments. And when he used his own sperm here, and that's the next part of the story, that was highly illegal. So here's what happened. Just brief, most of you know this part of the story, but the gold mining operations were a pain in the ass. These Anunnaki couldn't handle it, and so they needed to make some gold mining slaves. There was a rebellion in South Africa. Remember that Enki is assigned to South Africa, which later became the word Kilimanjaro, meaning Enki. And Enlil is assigned to North Africa. So you have the white race here. And here, Enki, remember, Enki's blood is blue-black from black here. So you have the black pharaoh, the Nubian, the Coptic, and the story that the black pharaoh that became Akhenaten, who was black. And so later, when Akhenaten changed his name to Moses, in the statue at Rennes-le-Château, you see that the devil Lucifer, who's really Enki, is black. He has horns, Moses, Akhenaten, horns, and he is in the statue holding up Magdalene. And so clearly Magdalene's blood comes from Lucifer. And this drove Saunier insane at Rennes-le-Château. He couldn't handle when he discovered the history. But the history too, the guy that he was calling the devil is basically the father of his hero, Magdalene. Oops, we got our PR a little screwed up here, didn't we? And so this is the black and white story of the whole Rennes-le-Château. And there's whole new books about what drove Saunier nuts. Anyway, so Enki, blue-black bud, Chem, became the name for Egypt from access to the place of blackness and chemistry and alchemy, has this assignment. He says, look, I could take some of the local Cro-Magnon and make some gold mining slaves by upgrading their DNA slightly. And he sends a message back to Sirius A on 2 and says, hey, Dad, we could get this gold mining back on track if we made some gold mining slaves over here. And Enlil, Michael, correctly, Yahweh, says, no, Dad, that's illegal in our culture. It would interfere with the guild right of star navigating. He was right. Thou shalt not interfere with indigenous gene pools. The prime directive. And by the way, when the Andromedans categorize all the 22 different ETs who mess with our DNA, the two categories are interventionist and non-interventionist, right? So Procyon, Tau Ceti, Sirius A, Andromeda, Arcturus, these are non-interventionist cultures. Whereas the interventionist, you have Alpha Draconis, Sirius B. So this was a non-interventionist rule. And Anu tables back, he says, well, I know it's against the rules, but look, we're going to die without this here gold powder, so he gives Enki the go-ahead. Now, the neat thing about that is that Enki picked the why did Enki pick the Cro-Magnon he did?
The exercise compassion.
Thank you. Go to the head of the class. Enki noticed that one of the local apes was seen actually exhibiting compassion to the other animals. This was shockingly interesting. The real physics here, it means that phase conjugation was still operative in some of the high monkeys there. So this was a highly vibrant DNA that actually had compassion. And so this created a DNA that was actually dominant over Enki's own reptilian DNA, was recessive, was less strong. Their DNA was weakening. Anyway, so Enki basically rapes an egg. For the first bunch, he used Cro-Magnon DNA and Cro-Magnon eggs, but these were not fertile. And then he decides he needs a fertile, the first Eve, and so he takes a Cro-Magnon egg, and it's a kind of rape. And this is how we need to understand. Yes, go ahead.
The Cro-Magnon, they were from Earth.
Yes.
They had been born of the...
Indigenous from rather ancient Earth. And perhaps their ancient roots of these Cro-Magnon were related to the bloodlines on Lyra. That's part of the story, that the ancient home of a lot of DNA came from Earth millennia, millions of years earlier.
That's a chicken or egg question.
It is. It's kind of a Groundhog Day story here. So the Cro-Magnon egg, you know, the story is that you're doing shamanic recapitulation, rebirthing for the whole gene pool. Now you need to get back to the moment of conception. Hello. Because that's how you do rebirthing, right? So here's the rebirth. Look, a little rape going on here, a little pain in the past. So the Cro-Magnon egg is raped, really, and put in his half-sister, Ninhursag, Inanna, depends who you believe. Hog, Mog, Magog, Sog, Hag. Og, you see the word Mog here. Og means fire going within, and Mog means matrix or mother of fire. Yeah? So fire in the blood comes from the Mog. It's really true, ignited blood. So the theme, remember, ignition of blood, title of the story. So half-sister Ninhursag Inanna, it gets to be the wet nurse for an egg from a Cro-Magnon, and of course, Enki is promiscuous. This fella is just leaking sperm all over the place. I'm sorry. This guy is a colorful character. Reminds me of, yes, we won't go into it. Yeah. Pardon? Amenhotep. These guys leaked sperm a lot, which is, I mean, you know, for better or for worse.
You're in the colonies.
Yeah, right. So he uses his own sperm in his half-sister Ninhursag Inanna and produces the first fertile female, Eve. Now, we need to know what the word Adam and Eve actually mean.
Whose sperm? Enki's sperm?
Enki's own sperm. He used his own sperm, absolutely.
Inseminate.
He inseminated his half-sister, in whom he had put an egg from a Cro-Magnon.
Okay.
Yeah. As a genetic engineer, I mean, at Dolly the sheep's laboratory, Enki would be regarded as a klutz. Okay? Just about as klutzy as those people there, so it all sort of fits. So Adam and Eve, Adam meant donkey or Borg or slave, literally made by the Anunnaki, Man. Made by Anunnaki. Adamic means red race, and the original word for them was Tak Adama, which means the red race created as from the Tak. Tak means Orion. Almatak, Mintaka, Hurtak, Urtak. Ur means dragon from Tak means Orion. H breathed from Hurtak. Breathed from the dragons of Orion.
So I got where the first Eve came from, but where did the first Adam come from?
So the story of the split rib is actually a genetic operation. It's a cloning function.
Oh, so
I
Adam
think.
and Eve are clones.
I suspect that there's controversy on that one, but I don't think the
It
division
can't
was...
be a clone if one's male and one's female.
It was definitely inbreeding. And Eve's rib, many people interpret to be a genetic engineering story where the rib is actually a haploid DNA. But I don't have a real answer to that question. But clearly, even the Adam and Eve story together is really racial. It's not a story of individuals so much. Just like the story of later in this story, we're coming to it very quickly anyway, the story of Ab, Ra, Am. Ra means sun god, which originally was Enki and then later Enlil tried to take it over. But Abraham is a name for Enki. And Abraham begat with Sarah, which is Asa of Ra. Sarah, the Asa, dragon queen of Ra. And begats the whole Benjaminic lineage. So and they came from the city Ur. You see? So this story, which biblically has been interpreted as the names of people, is actually the names of races. And many historians have now concluded that, and I think that's somewhat relevant here as well. This is a description of racial roots rather than individual persons so much, and needs to be interpreted as such.
So in other words, in a way, they were growing in semi-vats races.
That this was a explicit attempt. It's like different versions of Bill Gates software. Yes. That this is Enki trying to discover how to make the software work.
And so it keeps on rebooting itself all the time.
Exactly, and requires inbreeding to keep the shape-shifting capability. So now, the next part of this story would be basically all the different examples we have of what the bloodline Enki means. Now, here's the different names. Enki went by the word Ea, by the word Atun, by the word Enki, by the word Adonai, and later we have the words Poseidon and the Zeus story, whereas and it actually became called Lucifer, and later it became the word Baal, as in Beelzebub and Baalbek, and then it became the word Bo, as in Boheme and Bulgaria. So this side of the family had lots of names, many cultures. And this side of the family, Enlil, in Egypt, was called Amun. The Amun-Ra is in our word Amen. And these are the ones who murdered Akhenaten. And then Yahweh and Michael. So you have the Michaelic versus the Luciferic, and also the word Ahrimanic in the Steiner terminology, Ahriman. The Ahrimans like computers, the Lucifers don't. Pardon?
Arion.
Yeah, and very good. And the word Orion, Orion, and Arian. We know what the word An means. The word An means sun god. Ori means you have golden radiance in your aura. Fractality in the charge radiance. Orion. So an Orion, Arion, Orion is one who has radiant, implosive, a gold mane on the lion. Yeah, we were talking last night. The star elders of these Anunnaki were called the Leonines, the Sekhmet, the secret places of the lion, the Kathmandu, the Sphinx, the lion gods.
Dan, would you comment on the difference in the suffix between an versus al? North America an, Indy an versus Oriental?
The term El and Al mostly, well, for example, if you were to describe what happens to charge in DNA that does get a soul, it's a translation of vorticity such that the charge goes from the circle to the line. And the drawing of that is an L. So those who are able to make the L or phase shift are the ones who can translate their velocity and memory through the speed of light. For example, step on top of the Moxine light, the quartz cube in secret places of the Andes, and you appear to vaporize. If you're a Tron, you can take your memory with you through the speed of light. That is an L, as in Elohim. Yeah? Now, if we look at the shape of Alpha Draconis, we have some pictures, but the shape of the Alpha Draconis is actually the Arabic letter L. And the central star is Arrakis, which is Dune.
And Elnaton?
Elnaton.
Eltonin, pardon me?
Yeah, Eltonin.
And the Eltonin antenna.
So this is all a name for those who... Now, originally, El was a name for those who could do it. Later, El became a name for those who were wannabes. We think we ought to be able to, but... So the Elohim later came to describe those who would like to, but they really were having some trouble getting it up to speed there. So this becomes a clue then for describing various groups in history. Now let's track this bloodline. Remember, what we have here is a secret and dangerous attempt to breed a bloodline that could re-inhabit stars. That is a political hot potato back up here. Political hot potato. Empire could strike back any time. We're not sure we want this DNA getting out of here because it's powerful, it's dangerous, and it's in quarantine. Terminator's coming. So this becomes the story of trying to hide this bloodline through history, basically. And what we want to do now is track the story of that bloodline in virtually all major cultures of planet Earth. Remember we said in Australia you have snake god versus dolphin god. So in Australia he's called the dolphin god, right? In South Africa he's called Kilimanjaro. It's Enki. Credo Mutwa explained that to us. He was very helpful. And in Egypt, remember we've got the Atun versus the Amun. So, well, first we got to deal with Atlantis. So, in the descendants of Enki, his son was called Ningishida in Sumerian. Ningishida, spelled many ways. And in English, this became Thoth. And Thoth was called TWT, which means Tahuti, which in the Bible is spelled DWD, David. So everywhere in the Bible where you read the lineage of David, it means the lineage of Thoth. This is from the academic work of Ahmed Osman, Out of Egypt and House of the Messiah. And later Hermes, when it became Egyptian. But at the time of Atlantis, Thoth Ningishida and his father Enki had designed an electrical environment to save a gene pool called Atlatl, otherwise known as Thule. Thule basically means Enki's experiment, Thoth's experiment, which was the early name for Atlantis. And Atlatl here means, if you check the indigenous use of the term, it means projectile. And literally, if you go to the Native Americans of the American West, an Atlatl is a javelin. And you remember the pictures we have of Atlantis and Amsterdam, that's a concentric rings of water and land, which is how you fabricate a recursive capacitor. It's a projectile. It's a way for taking the charge field of a collective genome and projecting it into stars. Yeah? So, but Atlantis is only one of numerous millennial attempts to try to create a haven for a gene pool that could get psychoactive. Another example is the book Holy Grail Across the Atlantic, or just the Holy Grail story in general, which is the attempt to shepherd and harbor and hide a gene pool that could get psychokinetic. A short version then of the Atlantis story is, in the late stages of that culture, they were using they were using a technology from Sirius A, which was a 6 and 8-sided quartz cylinder suspended in a vacuum and sonically triggered to implode to get voltage from gravity, called fire crystal or toy stone, Tuoai, as elaborately described by Edgar Cayce and discussed by the physicist Sutton from Maryland, the fire crystals of Atlantis, which created an electric field that could get voltage from gravity. It's related to the Moxine light. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Moxine light. It's an implosive, capacitive quartz crystal. And they even have pictures of the Labradovsky, you know what it's called, where they had a quartz cube that would appear to vaporize, create gravity. Anyway, the toy stone was used originally as a fire that did not consume, related to the Vril story. This was a technology to couple the gravity field for the voltage to motorize a culture. Sadly, and this came from Sirius A, and they were basically klutzes in using this stuff. They weren't that good at it. They didn't have long memory. But sadly, they used the electric field, which had high frequency microwave and RF components. They used it then to enslave people. Lots of people, millions of people were enslaved in Atlantis with the crystalline technology of the priests. And the priests involved were the Amun priests, who later migrated to Egypt. So they misused this technology, misunderstood its frequency signature, misunderstood its ability to phase lock their own tectonics. And so that the gravity decay of Atlantis is directly related to failure to ignite DNA. So basically, Atlantis, as a place to grow up a gene pool into stars, didn't quite make it. So this then, the fragments of the Atlantean culture became, of course, the Titicaca story, and the Egypt story, and the India story. You kind of know that piece of the puzzle. The thing that's interesting in these various cultures, let's take the various cultures. In Egypt, the line was called Ptah. And Ptah came from Thuth Moses. Thuth Moses is actually a name for sons of Thoth. Moesha means son of Thoth. And Thuth Moses was a name for the kingship line of Egypt. And Ptah was a name for Enki's ancestors. And Kem, the original term for Egypt, meant the place of the black bloods, which was Enki, basically. And later, Atun, which means Enki, became Aku, Atun, Akhenaten. And then Akhenaten in Egypt attempts to build a solar capacitor to ignite DNA. You know the pictures. Oh, we got a little behind on our pictures here. Let's do the pictures. Here, close tab. This is what Enlil looked like. That's a fallen Anunnaki right there. It's a half-blood cross between Ebi and Uru. This is a straight Draco from Alpha Draconis. This is Dracu. Yeah, it's kind of grandma.
And what did Enki look at?
Enki looked close to this, maybe not quite so mean. Here is this is the Sumerian goddess from the Ubayyad. This is Grandma. This is Eve, right? And here is, you see the draconian features on Grandma. Yeah, this is the Uru side of the family. This is from the Sumerian Ubayyad on top, morphed, and on the bottom we've morphed the Celtic description of who Grandma looks like. She's the same person, basically. She's a great ancient dragon, Asa Uru! And that's what these pictures are. And here...
Those are coming from statues?
Yes. The statues are there. These are drawings of the Draco. Now this drawing is from Anna Hayes, but there are similar drawings from Phil Schneider and others at Dulce, and our friends who have met them. I mean,
what's the triangle between the two heads, Dan?
The saying is that the flag of Israel contains the triangles because of the shape of the starcraft from Alpha Draconis. So I guess that might be a Draco starcraft. That's a guess here. And the high ancestors were winged dragons, and this is not a very good picture. The Draco Targ, they call them. And even the winged dragon on Terry's porch up there is interesting to look at. The Siakar Mothman Archon idea. And this here is a little introduction to the lion story. The story was that the Anunnaki maintained a legend that their star elders were the lion gods, the Leonines, which became the Sekhmet story, and why they built the Sphinx, and why the same face is on Mars, because both sides of the interventionist Anuhazi, as they called the Anunnaki at that time, from the Anasazi, that both sides of the family tried to claim that they represented the will and intent of their star elders, the lion gods, the Leonine. So you have secret places of the lion, and why does a lion always guard the door to the temple? The lion's memory guards the door to the access of implosion in the eyeball into the center of DNA. And so at Kathmandu, there's a cat guarding the temple. At Sphinx, you have a lion. The lion guards the temple's gates because it serves you, because if you smell of fear, then when you enter compression, you'll experience heat. So better that the lion could tell you that you're in fear so you don't go in. So smelling for fear from the lion, and this was symbolically the lion ancestors. And Darlene, Vincent Bridges' partner, who runs the Sekhmet website, would be delighted to have you look at that literature in detail. So we were back here at Akhenaten. Let's see here. We were back at Akun Atun, and we were telling the story from Ahmed Osman's work. Have you seen, is it Ahmed Osman, right? Ahmed Osman. He's one of many authors who are now writing academic research into why Akhenaten changed his name to Moses, basically. Another one that's done a lot of work on that is Lawrence Gardner. Ahmed Osman's book were called Out of Egypt, House of the Messiah, and there's other books now.
So if Akhenaten was dispelled or dispatched by Amun, how did the story of Moses continue?
That's the story where we're about to tell. That's fun. Thank you. The story is that Akhenaten was basically straight Syrian blood, and he was so ugly they couldn't get a woman to have sex with him. So they used artificial insemination aboard a starcraft from Sirius A. I actually believe that story. The book on that is called God King Akhenaten by Daniel Stewart.
Damn this story.
Yeah. Because basically he had a very scoliosis of the spine, which I have some, and a very descended skull, which I have some, but not as much as he did. A cone head, basically.
His legs articulated backwards.
Yes, and his legs articulated backwards, and big pelvis. He's a strange-looking dude. And this is a Syrian genetic experiment that is not so sustainable, and the guy was basically kind of nuts in some ways. Let's not over-heroize the guy. But anyway, Akhenaten had, his dream was, of course, monotheism, and he created a star map called Amarna, which is related to the story of Solomon's temple. Amarna was Akhenaten's attempt, and I'm going to soulinvitation.com/Peru here to show you some pictures of Amarna. Amarna was his attempt to make a solar capacitor that could ignite DNA. I mean, temple is basically a name for an environment of capacitance necessary to ignite DNA. Here's some of William Buehler's. This is called the Rochelle grid. And here's it overlaid on Arthur's seat in Edinburgh. I mentioned William Buehler. This is the Templar agenda, the repair of the fabric of time, and the Rochelle grid superposed on the body of Europe, for example. There's some more advanced pictures of this elsewhere. Notice the recurrent theme here. We're going to talk about this in the star map section, where the overlay of the pent hex becomes the map to Rennes-le-Château and Holy Grail. This is all those same ancient dragon ancestors trying to create an electric field to ignite DNA.
Gave us the feudal system.
The feudal system. Igniting DNA is our theme. So, and here's that same face on Mars, and the pentahex that became Mars and Washington, D.C. It came from the dragon culture attempting to ignite DNA with charge. So the picture we came here to look at, we found it. Amarna was basically the layers of an onion. It was a solar fractal capacitor. Became the myth of Solomon's Temple in part. And look at other examples of solar fractal capacitors. Remember we talked about the place where the Anunnaki would go to get born and die. This is Machu Picchu. This is the bed. And it's lined up with the sun exquisitely. And on the 21st equinox, which was yesterday, the sun would arrive in focused charge compression, and it would be a time when birth and death was possible with electrical success. The physics appears to be that if you inhabit the center of a fractal, birth and death is electrically possible because charge packing and charge unpacking is the essential issue of conservation of memory at birth and death, which is why a Cherokee always looks for a hill fractal to the mountain behind it for the sacred burial ground.
How do you explain Machu Picchu was built in, let's say, 1000 AD, and then the Anunnaki or so were said to be 1200 BC, or is that incorrect?
The Machu Picchu has several layers. The core culture here had this exquisite rock geometry, and the later buildings did not. I suspect a part of the sculpture is much older, but clearly Titicaca means tin mine, and that's what Enki's family was here for. And it fits the diaspora of the Anunnaki in their vril craft. They would have used these peaks. So the early history, I suspect, is directly an Anunnaki family retreat, basically. In any case, the physics lesson here is useful, that here we have what they call Intihuana's prism. And the local rock of the temple is perfectly the same shape as the mountain behind it. Intihuana's prism. Why would that be a prism? Because the shape of the mountain behind it with the stone in front with the same shape but smaller creates a fractal relationship that invites charge compression and creates sacred space right here in front of it. And from that kind of space you could get born or die. So the physics here is reinventing all hospitals to permit death, which is basically a place of charge compression, fractal sacred space electrically. The opposite of today's hospital is a place to get born and die. Today's hospital is the worst possible place for birth-death because of the extreme electrosmog. So what's needed is the design of a solar fractal capacitor. And this is one of the expertise of the Anunnaki. I mean, they had some real skills here in terms of DNA growing. And so here's the morphology of Cusco, and you see the classic puma here. And the eye of this puma, aligned with the rays of the sun between equinox, is actually this fractal solar capacitor called Sexy Woman. I mean, Sachi Woman, what's it called? Saxi Woman, right? Sexy Woman, we call it.
Did Malku know that when he did those pictures, or?
Malku talks about the shape of the puma, and but I don't know if he really got into the electrical description. But he certainly has a lot of intuitions about that. He was very resonant to these ideas and helped us. And those pictures, yes, we need to credit Malku for these pictures, for that section of pictures. So we were...
Is this an appropriate place to break for lunch? Yeah?
We could, as you like, really.
Well...
the next part of this story is to track this through Greece, through Tibet, through all the different cultures and see the connections here. And we could easily do that after lunch. That's fine. Yeah. Yes?
You were saying that Akhenaten was trying to create a star system.
It's exactly new.
Yeah.
So I'm told that we should go for another half hour.
Okay, we'll go for a few more minutes. Fine. We'll take a break. Okay. You asked the right question, dear. She says, was Akhenaten trying to create a star system? Akhenaten was trying to create an electrical environment where humans could accelerate the electric field of their aura into stars. Star temple. Amarna. A star map. What do you do with a star map? Electrically, you create a capacitor in which your aura, your bliss charge field, your Ka, can be squirted back into those stars. That's what So this was a good attempt. The problem was that he blew the checkbook. These damn bird tribes, they never could handle a checkbook. They were the klutzes, right? Yeah, the King Ludwig. He just messed with the checkbook. Horrible. So the Amun-Ra priests, remember, the very lineage of this side of the family, these are the guys who run the checkbook. They know about checkbooks, right? That's they can handle. They're the bankers, the very origin of banking, yeah? So when Akhenaten has completely wrecked the checkbook, that gives the Amun-Ra priests, the Amun priests, who represent Enlil, a chance to retake power. So the Amun...
They set him up.
They set him up.
No, he's on their side.
Well, Akhenaten, who do you mean who's on their side?
Akhenaten is.
The way I understood the story was Akhenaten...
I know. He's a good guy, but he's not.
Well, Akhenaten was schizophrenic, actually. He had lots of troubles. He was psychologically unstable. It's actually very clear. Yeah. But in any case, the situation now where he has blown the checkbook means the Amun-Ra priests get the upper hand, and he has to run for his life. Yeah. And so at that point, the Amun priests make it a crime punishable by death to pronounce the word Akhenaten. So he is called by the shorthand Moeshish, Moses, which simply means son of. In this case, son of the Pharaoh. In the bloodline of. In the same way that Bar is in Barbara and Simon Bar Jonah. Bar means son of. Lineage of Barbar, the barbarian. So, Akhenaten changes his name to Moses and runs for his life. But the neat thing is he did get one thing together. He took the money. So, and the money here is not just the truckloads of gold. The money here is the Ark of the Covenant.
No wonder they were chasing him.
Oh, yes, big time. What happens is that the Ark of the Covenant is a nonlinear orgone accumulator. It's a capacitor, stone and gold, properly layered, and the Ark has an electric meaning.
It also has a form of wood in it.
The wood is a perfect biologic dielectric.
You have to have the biological and the metal and the biological.
That's right.
Acacia.
Acacia, which is a profoundly close-grained, excellent biologic dielectric. So the Ark of the Covenant is a technology from Sirius A, which was commonly used to fabricate the DC spark necessary to make gold powder. So this is the generator engine for making money. So later, this is how the pharaohs really got their big bucks. They would make gold powder and sell it to the royal families all over the planet. And the Essenes did the same thing, which Moses started. So Moses runs out, takes the Ark of the Covenant with him, and starts the Essenes.
Is this what's being played out in the Middle East, this aspect of the story?
Well,
I realize it goes in many levels, but
it does.
This is going to piss some people off.
So what?
In the Middle East, you have Uruk, which is called Iraq, and Uruk was a repository of other of the Sirius A technologies, which was the dolmenic structure for eliminating cellular aging. And boy, does George Bush need that equipment, because he's losing it fast, right? I mean, this gives you a little flavor. The whole bloodline which George Bush represents is desperate to get the last pieces of the Sirius A technology, which was mining equipment. And the mining equipment had to do with preventing cellular aging. Anyway, going back to this story then of the right in the Middle East, I have to say that we forgot one piece of this story, is that when Enki and Enlil first made their nuclear war in the Sinai, where you can still see the molten glass today, they so angered the half-sister Inanna Ninhursag that she takes off for the Orient and establishes the dragon cult there. And you have this whole Sanskrit Vedic dragon, Alpha Draconis star map at Angkor Wat. But there, she did not take Enki's blood. So in that whole Oriental culture, which is the Mongolian origins of the Ashkenazi, who became the Bank of England in today's Israel, the Ashoka, the king, that bloodline which usurped the Sephardic, the Ashkenaz, did not have the implosive blood. So,
and their whole representation of the dragon tribes are quite different. They don't consider dragons negative, they consider them very positive.
of course, that's nice.
They're the ones who bring the pearl.
That's right, that's good. And in that culture, the reptilian brain is dominant, the bird brain is not there, pretty much. And also it's illegal for the student to surpass the teacher. And that whole meaning of that is the difference.
And their language is pictographic instead of linear.
Yes, which would be the more reptilian brain dominant kind of neurolinguistic programming. So we're going to come back to that then when we get to the origins of Sanskrit and this Tibetan connection with Bon Po. That's why I wanted to mention that, because that's before this. Yeah, we're now in the birth of the Essenes, and so basically the son of Moses is called Joshua, later called Jeshua, which is Tut, which is Jesus. Now, I know there's several hundred years between the story of Jesus and between the story of Jesus and Moses and the story of Akhenaten and Joshua. However, if you read Ahmed Osman, he explains in detail how the Roman Catholic Church covered that lie, in great detail. And one table from that chart, just to give us the flavor, in soulinvitation.com/invasion, he has the genetic lineage of the Egyptian kings with a crossover to the Hebrews. And let's see if I put that in the right place here now. Again, at Invasion Index. That chart from Ahmed Osman. Yeah, there it is. Look at that. I even found it. Am I good? Okay, here we go. The Israelites and the Royal House of Egypt. Now, this is Ahmed Osman and Book Out of Egypt and the other text. Let's see. Unfortunately, with this viewer in Firefox, I can't change the scale easily. But notice that the Thutmose line, Thutmosis, which is the name of the royal kings of Egypt, was David, T-W-T, Thoth, Tehuti, Thutmose. And this line comes down, and here you see the start of the Solomon bloodline from Thutmose IV. And the bottom of this is kind of the fun part. Nefertiti is the sister of Moses and Mary and the mother of Jesus. And you see this bloodline cross then, the sons of Moses, Moses' bloodline from Amenhotep. Now here's Moses, here's the cross with Nefertiti, and here's the kids, Tutankhamun, Jesus. And Oxenpaten, who is depicted in the Egyptian cartouche with an alabaster jar. Okay, the symbol of Magdalene. Yeah? So here we have the whole Mag story as directly a story about the Grail and the blood, back to Egypt, back to Atun, back to Sun God.
So once again we have the story of the brother and sister meeting.
Yes, actually, when they said that the Essene two leading royal families, the Benjaminite and the Davids, became the Jesus Magdalene, so that the royal families of the Essenes phase conjugated to make Messiah, what they're really saying is that Akhenaten's children became Moses, the founder of the Essenes, and monotheism, unified field physics, and that phase conjugated to become Tutankhamun Oxenpaten. So the point is that by hiding the blood roots in Egypt, the Roman Catholic Church had made a rather dastardly political decision. And that's what Ahmed Osman is explaining pretty well, I think. Namely, that at the time of the Council of Nicaea, was it Constantine? Which Roman emperor was it that ran the Council of Nicaea?
Yeah,
Constantine. Yes. He decided, well, gee, it's pretty expensive to be babysitting all these religion wars, and why don't we make a state religion? Roman Catholic. And so he invited all the bishops in to have an argument, and then he told anybody that didn't agree to hack off the Egyptian roots would be killed. So the bishops who voted yes got to have their money, and the bishops who didn't agree got to be dead. And that's the origin of the Roman Catholic Church, really. And at that point, the Egyptian origins of the bloodline were officially made illegal, punishable by death for anybody who whisper that. And what you need to understand is the history of banking is the other side of the family. And they're always jealous that Enki had to fund DNA, and so they had to keep covering it up, basically. I mean, there's lots of levels to that description. So at that point, the religion is disempowered for the feminine, the meaning of Magdalene in terms of her ancestors, that induces a huge schizophrenia, which is painful to the shamanic roots of our whole bloodline, which is why it's so important to go back to see these shamanic roots. Now, if we see where this goes, then Tutankhamun goes out to try to save the life of his father in the desert and ends up strung up in a tree, crucified, by a guy named Panhasi. Isn't it Panhasi, anybody remember? And you can read in the Jewish text, the guy who killed Jesus is actually an Egyptian Amun priest. So this story of the Essene roots then becomes, remember the Benjamin line, you know, Joseph had the cup of many colors, the coat of many colors, which means raiment or braid in his DNA. Many colors in his coat. Joseph's Technicolor coat, you know what that is? How many recursive braids are in his DNA? And then how charged radiant would be his ultraviolet and capacitive field. And the harmonic inclusiveness of his aura electrically. And Benjamin had the gold cup in the seeds. Remember the story of Benjamin? The gold cup was hidden in the seeds. The gold cup is the grail of charge fractality in the roots of his genetic seed, the sperm. And the Benjamin line becomes the story of Magdalene, which we now know is Oxenpotin. And the Benjamin line then becomes the story of Arcadia.
These are the gold eaters.
These are the gold eaters, yes, yes. That Arcadia is the Greek descendants of the Essene Benjamites. And this becomes Et in Arcadia Ego in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Arcade means those of the branch, like the word Strion and Sion and Zion means those of the branch. Strion means to branch, as in the word science, to branch perfectly, which relates to our word divine. Anyway, the Arcadia became known as the Bow, as in the Boheme and the Bugaresh, Bug-Arat, and the Bulgarian. And so this bow line became the story, always this descendants of this lineage. So repeatedly we're tracking this through history. We're tracking the repeated attempts to create a psychokinetic bloodline in a culture where that is essentially illegal. You know, in a George Bush culture, it's almost illegal to get bliss. Everything possible is done to prevent bliss. Vaccination, metal cities, fear, dead food. The entire culture is exquisitely designed to prevent all DNA from imploding.
That's why we're going to break for lunch.
Okay.
Go have some bliss.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
You've written this in the books, or read the books and give